So,
Hello and welcome to the Fresh Air Sci-Fi show. I'm Joe.
I'm Dave.
and I'm Kevin.
And tonight we're going to be trying something a little bit different. Now I don't know if you all remember Kevin. He is our Canadian philosopher friend. That's one way to put it. Kevin, just for anybody who hasn't met you before, just give us a quick overview of who you are and what you do.
All right. So my name is Kevin Lapri, which is my last name. I never told you. I'm a French Canadian from the province of Quebec. I live in Montreal, and I go to the UQAM University, which is the biggest French university in North America. I study. I'm at the last semester of my bachelor degree, but you shouldn't you shouldn't think that means I'm equivalent to like a college student in the U.S. because Quebec has a weird education system. So I'm actually more like a master level student. Actually, at my level, my current level, I'm more akin to Dave than I am to a college student for sure.
Yeah, fair.
But he's way smarter and more informed than I am.
Oh, come on, don't say that.
Yeah, this entire stream's resting on you, basically. Now, tonight, actually, it was really beneficial that you were free tonight because we're doing it's a review of an article that I wrote that it's called The English Language Barrier. And
I read it, don't worry.
Good. So what we're going to do is I've actually pre-recorded the article reading, which is something we haven't tried before. So it was to give a different take on things. So I've pre-recorded it so that it should be a lot more smooth. But then if there's any comments that come in, I'll be able to read them as it's playing, and you'll then be able to we'll then be able to pause it and just address them right away. So it should make for an easier stream that way for us. But also, you know, as English is your second language, you'll have experienced a lot more barriers with English than us English-speaking people.
Actually, I think because you're so used to the way English works, you're maybe not aware of certain mechanisms in English. For example, you're not aware of what grammatical gender means in general, because English does have grammatical genders, in case you didn't know. For example, if I say to moon versus a moon, that's an example of that. But there's also the other words that you may not consider, like memory. And that's the good one, because in French, it is grammatical gender of the other sort, you know, with male and female, which memory has more than one meaning in French because of that. But in English, it's the same. If I say a memory, if I can pluralize memory, it means something else. And if I say T memory, you know, because one is about the faculty of memory, and one is about memories, you know, remembering stuff. So you do have grammatical genders, which means that you have, like any other language, a lot of meanings in one word that can be communicated depending on what the context and the sentence is. Sorry if that was convoluted.
No. I get what you're saying. I mean, there's lots of things. I mean, you even see a lot of the memes that come around, and they talk about English, and then they go, try and say this word this series of sentences in any other way, and you sort of do it, and you go, why doesn't that sound? And there's all these unwritten rules that you pick up just because you're speaking it. You know, that's.
Yeah, and I happen to know, I'm not an expert, but I happen to know a few things about philosophy of language, so I ought to be able to chime in about a few stuff.
Excellent. I know nothing about the philosophy of language. I was just talking about all the problems that we seem to suffer with speaking language to other English speakers. You know, that it's just the general things that people often don't think about when they're communicating English native speaker to English native speaker. So, I mean, I'm hoping...
Very funny to watch you go when you butt in together. As English speakers, it's very funny to see you go at it, you know?
Yeah, especially when you're arguing over a definition. Yeah, at least one of you, if not both of you, are going, yeah, well, that's, you know, language changes and evolves and things can have different meanings. But this one is the one we're using. Know this one. Quite a common thing that happens on the internet. So yes, hello Steen, nice to have you here as well, and Claire as well, and Bible, thank you for joining us right at the beginning, and everyone else out there, I can see a few more have joined in. Come say hello in the chat room. We love to have you here. Tonight is an interactive one. They're all interactive really, but we're just watching an article reading and reviewing as we go along. So any comments that you have, shout them out, and I'll pause the video. Brad, nice, thank you for sharing it. And if your bowels are as bad as mine at the moment, I apologize to anyone else who is anywhere near you.
By the way, if you have questions for me specifically or Dave, I will be reading the chat live too.
Yes.
So you don't have to.
Yeah, I'm trying to keep an eye on it as well.
Yeah. And obviously, guys, at any point that you want the article to be paused because there's something you want to discuss more, or give it an experience that you've had on it, please just let us know. Hey, Kimmo, nice to have you here as well. So I'm gonna quickly, in fact, I'm gonna switch things to the new one I was just setting up before the stream just to see if this works. Yeah, so I was also setting up a slightly more simplistic look for everything, which is this one. So I know it's a bit less interesting, but it does mean that I don't have to go on be right back mode to share the screen or anything like that. So what do I need?
I was going to say, so it means you're going to break it.
that often happens when we try new things. Or try and do the same old thing as well, to be fair. No matter what I do, it all goes wrong. That should be coming through to all of you.
Yep.
Yeah, coming through here.
Why does it say it's private? I saw it on your channel.
It's because it was, I loaded it up before it had gone live, so I set it to go live 5 minutes before the stream. But I haven't refreshed the page. So the English language barrier. Let me know if the volume's definitely. Oh, that would help. Coming through to you guys. Hi there. Thought I'd try something different and actually pre-record one of the article readings. So welcome to the first Davidian Reads. And tonight we're going to be covering off the English language barrier. The English language barrier. You often hear it said that England and America are two countries separated by a common language. Whilst this is tongue-in-cheek, it holds some truth to it. A prime example is how in America, chips refers to what Brits would call crisps, and what Brits would call chips, Americans would call fries. We have fries over here too. It's just that the French fry is a specific kind of chip, a subcategory, if you will. Using language is one way we communicate with each other. But what is communication? Communication is how we convey our thoughts, ideas, emotions, plans, and other information to one another. Our use of language can help us do that and is hopefully an effective way. What we need to understand is the language of the person we are talking to. It may be the same base, but there could be significant differences. This is a problem because most people seem to think they are being clear with their language because they understand what they are saying, and perhaps their friends understand them too. So clearly, you are the idiot if you don't understand them. To refer back to the chips example, it's even more complicated than that in the UK alone. From north to south, it can seem like we're speaking a completely different language. But if you live here, you notice that this can actually be more specific to the county you live in when you travel to others. And it doesn't stop there. For example, there's private language. There are social bubbles that form their own language as well. My favourite example of this goes back to my tweenage, late teens to early 20s years, where we used to play a lot of Tony Hawk's Pro Skater. For some reason that I cannot remember, we started referring to Tony Hawk's Pro Skater as Desley. Desley 3 was the main one we played, but we did go on to play 4 and Desley Grundlemound, aka Tony Hawk's Underground. We all understood what we meant, but no one outside of our bubble would. In fact, I sometimes talk about Desley to people and forget they were not part of my circle 15 to 20 years ago. Now, Desley is an efficient way to say Tony Hawk's Pro Skater. It's a shortcut in language, and language is defined through use. It is perfectly valid, but it's not that useful outside of that little bubble. However, with something as weird as that, it's obvious to me when I've made a mistake in my communication and have clarified quickly. Obfuscation and technical language. We quite often see people obfuscating their points with overly technical language on the internet. Some people use this advanced terminology because to people who don't know what they mean, they sound smart and therefore must be right in their conclusion. It's a nasty psychological trick you see folks like Jordan Peterson do all the time. Sometimes they are making sense, and sometimes it's complete word salad invented to make them sound smart. They may actually understand what they mean, but are using those terms in ways that they are not normally used. They could have some very good points, but because they have used this technical language in a personal way, they have just made a mess of the conversation. There are other issues too, where people do use this plain language and think they are being clear, but are actually saying something else. This problem can then be conflated by others chiming in and saying they are being clear, or thinking everyone I speak to thinks I'm being clear. Well, my friends think...
There's a spelling mistake there.
Well, it's in the video now.
You're not using airplane language.
Where is it?
Or you're not using geometry plane language.
Is that where
people do use this plain language? It's supposed to be PLAIN.
Oh yes, yeah. No, I see it. I see it. Oh well, it's in the it's in that video now. It's immortalized forever.
No, go back and redo
it. To be fair, I
like that your article says reading time 11 minutes, but you look at the video and it's 21 minutes.
It's because I read really slowly. And to be honest, reading in your head is a lot faster than reading out loud anyway.
Yeah, that's true.
But yeah, at least I got one of the versions of plain correct, you know?
Yeah.
It could have been PLAYN. I think I'm being clear when I talk about Desley, but that's a private language. It's not clear to those that don't know it. They're either going to debate me or block me, but I'm being polite to them because they need to know they are lying. They may unintentionally be spreading false information, but they are saying things that are empirically false. Something to consider. If they don't know they are lying, they are not lying. Lying requires intent. It's an intentional deception. A link to the Plato Stanford entry on lying. The reason I provided this correction is that he wrote, they need to know they are lying, and then in a new sentence wrote, they may be unintentionally spreading false information. These statements are in conflict. He came back stating that's what he said with his second statement about unintentionally spreading false information, but that still leaves his first statement incorrect. They need to know they are wrong, or they need to know they are spreading falsehoods would have been clearer, because his statement above seems to infer that they can unintentionally be lying. And he needs to let them know that. He also said he felt he was clear with his words. Isn't that what I said? In the comment above, I said they may be unintentionally spreading false information. I called that all the time because that's not a lie. Just like being delusional is not being crazy. I usually try to be careful with my words. Fair. If that's what you meant, then I'll accept that, but it didn't come across that way. As for the delusional point, if you're accusing someone of being delusional, you're essentially accusing them of mental illness, intentionally or not. To save argument, I simply accepted he meant that and said that it didn't come across that way, though did address the point that keeps coming up on the internet about religious people being delusional. So, there are problems with using delusional to refer to the religious. There is a difference between being deluded and being delusional. Much like you could say there's a difference between feeling depressed and suffering from depression. The one problem here is it's not clear if the depressed person suffers from depression, and stating that they feel really low would be clearer, just like there are better words than deluded due to the link to delusional. I had a conversation about this recently on Reddit where someone was questioning why religion wasn't considered a delusion and saying that the DSM should change the definition of delusional to include religious people. I suggested that if he knew anyone in mental health, he should actually speak about their patients who suffer delusions and have the disorder versus the average religious person. See, I think there's a difference between being deluded, especially in the colloquial sense, and suffering delusions. If you're deluded, you're simply not believing something in the face of evidence, but that's not delusional in the mental health sense. Terms like misled, mistaken, naive, ignorant, etc. are probably more appropriate. It makes no sense to include holding false or unjustified beliefs as a mental illness. If that was the case, anyone that claims there is only one definition of atheism would also be mentally ill, because it's a polysemous term with a rich history. The funny thing is, from my previous conversation, the gentleman in question felt that he tried to be careful with his words, yet in his example, delusional is not being crazy, it showed that he used language in an atypical way to how it was defined in the field of psychology. Not that psychologists would typically use the term crazy, as it's an insulting term, but we can infer he meant mentally ill. Now, I understand colloquialism. Having had him clarify it a bit, I get that he meant they were wrong. But he wasn't being clear with his language. It can easily be taken that he is accusing someone of being mentally ill. And with the whole meme of religion is a mental illness, you can understand why that accusation would be taken that way. I don't think simply believing in a god makes you mentally ill. Most theists I speak to are generally quite rational and responsible folks. There are some who are into that whole faith healing thing and the like that are really dangerous. Even then, I don't think they are necessarily mentally ill. I think they are really devout believers who are incredibly mistaken. Regarding them as mentally ill won't help. Anyway, hopefully, that explains the issue with using terms that, regardless of their history, form a part of a psychological diagnosis and is not the way they are usually understood. If you want to learn a bit more about delusions, I suggest checking out here. Conversation did seem to go of the way of people justifying them not meaning it necessarily as a mental illness, or others in the thread proclaiming they do think religion should be classed as a mental illness. So even in the thread, we see people with different takes on the word, providing a prime example of how this can be unclear. The person in question, however, responded like this. I believe it's about the clearest you can possibly say it, but I understand if you personally don't see it that way. Everyone else I've ever spoken that phrase to thinks it's worded perfectly. I also understand your second claim and feel that it's 100% false. Care to discuss?
Just to
we see
break
again
it
the
up a little.
perception of one's own clarity. Right, yep.
Rather than it just be us watching a film.
I did wonder when someone was going to chime in.
I was waiting after the end of the section, to be honest.
Yeah. Do you want to finish the section?
It's nearly there. It's to that bit. Should we stop it at that bit, at the lying bit?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, sounds good enough.
It's natural. We all do it. So this isn't a jab at him or anything. It's explaining how we can be unclear. You can see, though, he's fueled by everyone else I've ever spoken that phrase to thinks it's worded perfectly. Hopefully, I've explained why the statement was unclear. Also, from some of the responses he got... Boom, that's the end of that section.
Okay, so here you're mostly speaking about colloquialism, right?
Yeah.
The fact that when we are talking in a specific context, one word can mean many things.
Yep.
A perfect example of that will be with a word like bitch. Bitch is a perfect example because in one context it's a slur, and another it's referred to a female dog.
Yep.
It's also a compliment in another
context. You couldn't make
context.
a better example.
That's bitchin' as well. You could be talking about certain behaviors as well. I mean, it's got loads of different ways that word can be used.
Yeah, actually, I saw something of the sort on Twitter recently, where two people were arguing about the word experience, basically. One guy asked a black woman, if you had to choose between Candace Owen, which is like a very conservative black woman, and a white guy that knows a lot about black people, who will you choose, right? And she answered, well, if about the experience of black people, I would choose Candace Owens, even if she's not a good representative of black people, she's still black, right? And the guy went, so, well, what if you, but in other words, is not an expert on black people. And I understood, oh, I know what the problem is there. One person is thinking about experience as a subjective lived experience, which is also known as familiarity. And the other person is thinking about experience, like when I say expertise, that is experience about an object of experience. So they're not talking about the same thing, but they both think they are. So the argument is void because it's born out of a misunderstanding, a colloquialism. Because experience, the second meaning, is colloquial. Usually, we use it more as the subjective one, but as I just explained, you can use it both ways. It just depends on the context. And online, when it's in written form, it's harder to understand those contexts. It's easier to get confused, which is other. Like, no one is wrong in this conversation I just gave you. Both people are right to say that if you're talking subjectively, a black person is better to tell you about the subjective experience of being black. But if you're talking about objective reality, technically anyone that is expert enough about it can tell you about what it is to be black, objectively speaking. So that's an interesting comment to make, right?
Yeah, no, I'd agree with that. I mean, you could say, you don't necessarily need the experience yourself to be able to understand a wealth of other people's experience and things that other people go through. And maybe you could even say, for example, in the example that you gave, that incredibly conservative black person might be someone that wouldn't necessarily be as good to represent the black community as a whole, because they need someone that can actually understand all the trials and tribulations that they go, especially in the poorer areas. And a conservative wouldn't necessarily think about those as much, regardless of their color. So you can understand right there, that's exactly why. I mean, that's why they're talking cross purposes, though, isn't it? Because they're not really getting what each other means. And that's one of the problems with language. It can be really hard to speak in a way that is clear enough for someone to understand you. And you can question and try and nail down what they mean and what they do. And you can go, okay, I can sort of get that you're using it this way, but you do realize that it does usually mean this. No, it doesn't. Okay.
Well, in philosophy, I think that they will agree with me. We usually have two ways to deal with this. The first one is
stipulative.
Distinctions. Yeah, you know that one word can have many meanings, and you explain what each meaning is and what context you use each meaning, so it's clear for everyone. But sometimes a word can have so many meanings, or meanings that are so complicated to distinguish from one another, that we just prefer to create a new word to distinguish them further than just explaining the meaning. So which is what I did in my example, because I gave you other words to explain myself. I used the word familiarity and expertise, right? So that's another way philosophers do that. And technically, we all do it in our own personal life. We just don't do it the same professional way a philosopher do it. As we don't just intentionally think so hardly about how we speak, because not everyone is obsessed with meaning, clarity, and concepts, right?
No, definitely. I mean, I think that's one of the things that we try and do with our articles when we're going to be discussing a particular term as well. I mean, one of them that always gets people annoyed is when you're having a conversation about atheism. And it's one of those things I go, right, for this particular article, I'm using the colloquial lack of belief. For this article, I'm using it this way. And you stipulate how you're using it. You can even give justifications why you're using it for this article. Or say, right, for the first half of the article, I'm going to be using it this way, then that way. I'll let you know when I switch my use up. But people really, really, really focus on these things, even if you're saying, look, just this... I know it's defined different ways. You might have a preference. And I think
the problem is worse in everyday life because people are not used to that. But when you're an academic, like if you work in any academic field, you're used to it. Like, for example, the word idealism, right? Idealism. In philosophy, there is many, many meanings to that word. But if you're not in philosophy, you might think there is only one meaning. So if someone comes to you and saying, no, that's not idealism, that's one understanding of idealism, you might get pissed, which is the same as you said for atheism. If you understand atheism in one way, and someone tells you, well, that's one way to look at it, but that's not the only way, you might misconstrue you as being like an apologist. You're trying to model the work, and I think if I remember, you speak about that later. Like you sound like you're trying to make things up, right? You're trying to make things more confusing, even though you're actually doing the
opposite.
Right?
Yeah.
But for someone, but it's kind of, I kind of see it the same way as I see philosophy in general. That is that it bothers you, it confronts you, but like it's not like deep, like it's not existential dread, but it's enough to bother you, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's enough to think to yourself, was I wrong about this the whole time? And yeah, maybe you are. But nobody likes to think about that, and only like philosophers and other sadistic intellectuals do that all the time to themselves, right? Yeah. Nobody likes to doubt themselves all the time.
No, but then I think people need a bit more of it as well. People need to doubt themselves a bit more. People are too confident in things that they don't know enough about.
Someone wrote in the chat, I think Cantel Torah and Dulard Auntie are being dishonest.
I think we can tell the Ra and Dillahunty are being dishonest. Dillahunty.
Sorry, I'm the wrong pronunciation.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if they're necessarily being dishonest, if I'm honest. I think they really believe what they're saying sometimes.
I think they're just as confused as anyone else, to be honest.
Yeah, maybe.
I think, as you said, they truly believe the definitions to use. They just don't understand the very possibility that there is more than one.
Yeah, and when you even approach that, he will go, yeah, there are other definitions, but they're all wrong.
Many definitions can be both valid at the same time. Just
yes,
register.
Exactly. I mean, you can have a contextually correct definition, but with something like this, it's it is just part of living language. It's one of those.
If that was true, why will dictionary have more than one definition, right?
Yeah.
If there was truly one superior definition for every word, then why will dictionaries list more than one?
Yeah.
It wouldn't make any sense.
Yeah. Which is actually quite funny. You bring up dictionaries. So the other day, I mean, we were having a conversation. I think it was in a Facebook group, and that people were stomping their heels about there only being one definition of atheism. I said, well, no, there are actually multiple definitions, and they're all valid. I mean, all it takes is a quick search to find that there are these different definitions. And I brought up the Cambridge Dictionary and showed him, look, this is how it's defined there. So it's not only that definition, they're both valid definitions. And he turned around and he says, I'm not going to trust your wish.com dictionary, and threw up the Merriam-Webster. And even in the Merriam-Webster, it had two different definitions of atheism. So he'd even proved himself wrong about the only one definition. But yeah, anyway. Hey Rev, nice to have you here, and John, how you doing? If you've just tuned in, we're doing a live article watch and discuss. So hopefully you'll enjoy this one. We've just been going through the section about someone thinking they're clear when they're not. But yes, Lone Wolf says, the real problem is we can't be mind police, and it's just hard to tell if the person is being intentionally dishonest with misuse of new words or just being mistaken. And I think that's right. I don't think we should ever assume someone is dishonest. And even in the sense where, Ra genuinely believes all other definitions are wrong. He accepts that they're there, but he believes they're wrong. I think he genuinely believes that they are wrong, and he's just...
that's not dishonesty, yeah.
No, I think he is just mistaken. You know, I think he's genuinely mistaken. He doesn't fully get how languages work. He's sort of quote mind. He might have acted dishonestly to back up his position a few times.
And philosophy would say he's a bad epistemological agent because he's poorly justifying his own beliefs, his own knowledge claims, actually.
That's a really good way to put it. I'm going to try and remember that one.
Yes, a poor epistemological agent is just someone that's terrible at justifying themselves.
Awesome.
In a knowledge context. Otherwise, it's a poor ethical agent for moral claims.
Steen says, stop discussing atheism, start discussing your points of view. Are you talking about, in general, or are you talking about the article, or are you having a go at people on the internet?
I think he meant that to avoid the confusion about the definition, just start talking about it.
Yeah.
Thus the confusion will vanish by itself.
Yeah.
And I think that's a very simplistic way to view it, to be honest.
I try to... In conversations, I try to go with someone else's definition unless their definition is of words in general. I'm not talking about atheism right here, but unless their definition just is, really logically inconsistent. There's problems with it. If they start saying things like, I don't know, just talking about triangles with 10 sides. And you're just like, but okay. So what you're saying is triangle means a 10-sided shape. Is that what you're actually saying? And you end up having to do so many translations in your head that it's just like, well, no, this is a confusing conversation. But I think with most things, you can actually agree on basic definitions of things. Although there are contextually correct definitions, and if you're having a scientific discussion, then you should try and use the scientific language. And for a lot of atheists who do seem to proclaim science as the number one thing, the dog's bollocks, then surely we should be having that greater respect for scientific language, and should be doing our best to making sure that when we use scientific language, we use it correctly, even if we're using it slightly outside of the context of science, like the example that we had earlier with someone talking about delusional. And he, like it said in the article, and Frieda brought up, he got confused between deluded and delusional. But I also brought up the problem with using words that are so close to other words as well, because they can be taken in that context.
I think you and I had a conversation about this earlier, right? About when people talk about ethics and morals, right?
Yeah, see, that's a good one. And within the English language, ethics and morals are usually seen as pretty much the same thing, though. Or ethics and morality, should we say? Morality is the principles of good and bad, right and wrong behavior, and ethics is usually the same thing. But ethics can also be the study of morality, or thinking about and justifying
the process
your
of justification. Yeah.
And I think you said generally in a second language, like in French, there isn't that crossover bit. Like where in English we have blurred the lines and have them as separate.
I think something I forgot to tell you. It's a good comparison would be to say that science is to morality what epistemology is to I meant to say morality is like science in a way. That is that when you ethics is the justification of morality, and epistemology is the justification of science. So you can do science without knowing anything about epistemology, technically speaking. But to be a very good scientist, to go above and beyond, you should learn a little bit of epistemology, at least a little bit. Yeah, because epistemology is the study of justification of knowledge. So if you don't know anything about that, you may be not the best scientist you could be.
That's a good way to put it. Yeah. And I mean, I do understand this distinction. But the other thing is, right, so what we've done there is we've just explained how ethics and morality are used in English-speaking languages, how they are usually conflated
as one and the same. Yeah.
as one and the same, but they can be this slightly different thing. And
I argue it should be.
and in a second language like French and most other foreign languages, they are nearly always this separate thing. But here's the kicker. The average layperson uses ethics and morality in a very different way too. They use morality to mean your personal morals and principles, and ethics to be your society or culture's morals and principles.
You're right. Even in English, people do that.
Yeah. No, they do. That's what I. So what
that's
they've done is they've just.
That further my point. That it does indicate that ethics means more than that.
Yes, it does, but they've still got it really confused as the topic. They've basically just described moral subjectivism and moral relativism. And in doing so, they then draw conclusions, and this is one of the problems with these like definitions that are not contextually correct for the topic they're discussing. They then draw these conclusions that, well, because morality is defined as your personal morals, of course it's subjective, and ethics, well, because it's defined as your culture's morals, of course it's relative. And there you go, that's it, morality is solved. And you're like, okay, but you're missing the entire actual topic of morality and ethics. So even though they are seeing them as these slightly different things, their conflation has led them to a faulty conclusion. It's logically consistent, at least, with their definition. Their conclusion is consistent with their definition, but their definition is not contextually correct. So they've kind of just replaced one set of words with another.
You're actually remembering me of my classroom about critical thinking, actually.
Really?
Yes, it's a class about how to make arguments and talks about things. It's a mix of epistemology and rhetoric, to be honest. And one of the points we make is that to make an argument is not just about the logic of your argument. It's not just about the validity of your argument, but also the rhetorical strength of it. And a good example of that is when you have some people that argue correctly, but somehow end up being less convincing. A good example of that is backfire effect. For example, you have kids, right?
Yeah.
If one of your kids come to you and say, "Don't go in my room, there's nothing in my room," which is an argument that no one was making. No one was asking, is there something going on? So nobody was arguing that. But if someone starts defending the opposite thesis, now you're suspicious. You don't believe it. So even if I made a very good case that nothing is going on, the simple fact I am making the argument seems suspicious.
Yep.
Which is a good example that logical validity and rhetorical validity are two different things. I can make the perfect logical argument for you to not go in my room, but rhetorically, it just sounds weird that I'm even making the argument.
Yes. Yeah. No. You're right. Sorry, Dave. Go for it.
A person can argue very confidently an erroneous argument, one that's wrong and doesn't lead to a good conclusion, and all the premises that they build.
Another good example of that is a streamer you might have heard of, Bosch. You know, it's a big political streamer. What he likes to do, and he's very bad at doing it, is making counterfactual things, like very weird hypotheticals. Okay, the problem is his hypotheticals are so bad and so outlandish that he end up being arguments against them. And this is something that happened very frequently historically for people. A good example I have in mind from my class is, I forgot the name of this man, but someone wanted to argue against women's rights, and he wanted to make a satire of it, right? A satire of the concept of women's rights. So he wrote an entire parody of on the state of women's rights. It was like a book about women's rights, and he wrote a parody of it, but about animals. But it backfired because the books ended up making good points about why we should give animals rights. So it backfired very badly for the person making it. And this is very common. People don't realize that you don't just have to be right logically, you have to be right rhetorically too, if you want to persuade people.
Yeah. Which can be hard to get the balance right, really.
And this question about synonyms and colloquialism, it's a good point. It doesn't matter if you're right logically if you're not convincing at all.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, that's why Aaron Ra can argue like he does. He has a sort of
He has one
minister,
little
Baptist minister. Yeah. He's got the charisma, he's got the arrogance, he's got the confidence. And even if he's wrong, people will. Yeah, that's it. It's still following whether he's right or not because they're taken in by his persona. Whereas if somebody like me was to get up, I'd be a bit nervous, and no matter how correct I was, people would go for the confident one because.
By the way, I could send you to
we've kind of evolved that way.
I just remember. I could send you to the article I'm talking about critical thinking. It's in English, so I could send it to you.
Excellent.
Nice one.
I always need to brush up on mine, that's for sure.
I just go find it in my resources for class,
Oh, hey, honestly, atheist.
In chat.
Just seen your message. Welcome. Yeah, we're just going through an article review, and we've stopped about halfway through and just chatting about language and colloquialisms and everything like that. So this article that we're discussing is about the English language barrier. If you've missed it, the actual video is available in our playlist article readings. So I uploaded that earlier. So excuse me. So far we have covered off, the perception of one's own clarity and people obfuscating with overly technical language and just a general conversation and people using words like delusional, like scientific language, in a way that is atypical for it, and especially for us atheists who often say that we support science, we respect science, science is the best, and then go and use scientific terms the wrong way. And that's basically all of that sort of stuff is how we got up to the conversation that we're just having now. So I don't know exactly when you chimed in how much of that conversation you just heard. As Kimo says, a little knowledge is a dangerous thing. Yeah, it definitely is. That's why I'm a very dangerous person. I've got so little knowledge. Sorry, I'm just trying to catch up on the chat. Have you been catching up on it? I've missed it.
I've been keeping an eye on it.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Give me a shout if there's anything. I'm sort of. Yeah, I'm terrible at this, aren't I?
We all are.
Yeah. I don't know how you guys are still watching us, but thank you. We love you. You guys ready
because
to?
You're 12. Now that you've changed.
Well, we are going into intentions now, so.
We are.
So
yes.
We are already almost there, so we might as well watch the point about that, right?
Cool. So
I just want to make one more point about, he was saying the people he speaks to think he's being clear. I don't think he's wrong when he says that the people that he's speaking to think he's clear, because he exists in the kind of discourse where this word is used to describe religious people. And they don't care whether it's technically correct. All they know is that they want to call religious people delusional. So even if they're not using the term in exactly the same way, it seems to imply the same thing, so they're quite happy to use the word. But anybody who wants the word to be used in the contextually correct or technically correct context won't find it clear, because they're not concerned with belittling religious people or making them sound crazy. Their concern is what the word actually means, which is why people he speaks to within those circles of discourse will find him to be speaking in a clear manner.
Yeah. Even if they do actually misunderstand him, though,
Yeah, that's it. They agree with the sentiment, and they don't care about the definition.
Yeah. John actually says, I think the main problem is people are used to being compartmentalized. Therefore, either people speak from a grammatical perspective, scientific, or theological, and they can all vary depending on the language. And I think that's right as well. I mean, the problem is when there's these certain expectations of people who proclaim they use scientific language correctly and they're clear, but they then use some other definition on it, and this is also another problem. And like Dave was saying, and it's something I bring up in this article. I don't know if it was before this bit or if it's after it, about social bubbles. You do have social bubbles where that sort of thing, you've got these different ones, and it's clear for this context and it's not clear for that context. So yeah, no, I agree with you, John. Rev says atheists used the same language in the exact same manner that theists did or do. You are delusional if you don't believe in God. Teachers are indoctrinating kids on evolution and LGBT. Yeah, I mean, indoctrination is one of those terms that actually we were discussing earlier today, that we should probably do a stream on indoctrination, because it's something that is so frequently used incorrectly. But yeah. And Lone Wolf says, to Dave's point, that is the same reason people like Kent Hovind feel so empowered to use such arrogant and offensive language. They think it's how smart people talk, to a very cringe degree.
I think Lone Wolf has a point, because a lot of people, when they think about universities in general, think about people using complicated words. And it's true to a degree, let's be fair. I mean, some writers and some fields are known to love to use complicated words. A good example of that is Max Weber, the sociologist. He loves to invent words. He just does it all the time, and it's kind of ridiculous, because a lot of the words he invents were not necessary. Let's be honest. But the thing is, sometimes you do need complicated words. Sometimes it's better to have them than not have them, because of the problem I explained earlier, that sometimes if you just add up to existing words, you end up with a word that is so meaningless at the end, because it has so many meanings that it means nothing in itself. So you do have to create new words sometimes, especially if the concept you want to explain is better explained in another language, which is the case for a lot of German philosophy, for example, is better explained with many words, so you want a new one that condenses this meaning, or is just such a new idea that there is nothing really explaining. A good example that someone wrote, and that Lone wrote himself, is the word cringe. Cringe, as many people understood at some point, doesn't really have a translation in another language. Not usually, actually. I don't have a French word for cringe. It doesn't exist. The closest I can use is like shame or embarrassment, but it's not really that, isn't it? And that's why
it's
if I
very
wanted
close
to talk
to,
about
but
cringe,
yeah.
I would either use the English word, or I will make up a French word that doesn't exist. And that's fine, because it's a novel concept for me in French.
Oh, that's interesting. It's amazing how many words don't translate as well. I mean,
A lot.
yeah, well, it's one of the things that I used to notice. So I used to go to boarding school, and there are a lot of Asian folks there, lots of people from all around the world. But what you actually notice, especially within the Cantonese folk, they would be talking a lot of Cantonese, and then like every sort of 20 odd words there was an English word or phrase thrown in there, and it was just like you'd occasionally catch these little bits of sentences, and that's because there wasn't an equivalent sort of thing in their language. So yeah, no, very interesting. Where are we at? Rev says we should do a stream on indoctrination. Should we be trying to indoctrinate people, though, Rev? Kimo says Americans tend to award an additional 20 IQ points to any orate who speaks with any British accent. I don't know. I think if they came from Dorset or Somerset and they were talking about their combine harvester, I don't think they would. There's a reason there is no news presenters that talk like that.
Or Glaswegian.
Yeah.
Mostly because I wouldn't understand them. Yeah.
I agree with people like a British accent, because nobody likes a Canadian accent.
It's one big beaver,
That's
eh?
why people listen to Joe and not me.
I'm not really a Canadian accent. I'm like a French Canadian.
Yeah, you do sound
accent.
French.
It's very different. So yeah.
I would say that you, to my untrained ears, you sound like a French person that doesn't have a strong French accent. Like, if
I can see that.
yeah. So if
that.
someone had lived in France most of their life and then spent like 10 years living in England and it had softened up or something.
According to linguist historians, that's because French and Quebec is very old sounding. Actually, we use like very old vocabulary. Like we use words that's are like very old French. We still use those. That's why I joked earlier that I use Middle Age French, because it's kind of true in a way. We use like colonial era French, and we still do. so that's why French people that come from France, when they come to Quebec, say, "Wow, your French sounds so weird."
Really?
It is to them. It's not modern to them. Fun fact, like just fun fact.
Yeah, no, I didn't even realize that. So yeah.
Yeah, I speak like someone from the 18th century, apparently.
And John says, I think they like the proper British accent, which I believe is called the Queen's. Because, oh, you think they like it when you talk like this, you know, as if they're sort of like, you know, I'm James Mason or something, you know. And this is what we can all talk like this for the evening.
Personally.
I can't really do the Irish accent. I'm pretty shit. That's the closest I get, though.
Okay, Colin Farrell.
Fucking hate him.
That's why I called you it.
But yes, I'm going to carry on with the video before we end up just doing me doing terribly bad accents for the evening, because they get worse from there. They honestly do. You try and get me doing a Welsh accent, I end up like I'm speaking Indian or something. It's God. You want to hear my Scottish accent? I can't remember how.
Just make it.
I'm trying to think of a sentence to say in French, because all I can think at the moment is "Oh dearie me," but "Hootsman, don't let that juice loose about this house." Old English ad. That's all I can think about in Scottish. We can see again the perception of one's own clarity. It's natural. We all do it. That's about as good as I can get with Scottish. I do apologise. And now the entire of Scotland is planning to wage war on England for that atrocity. So I formally say I am sorry. I do have family up there. Please don't kill me.
Scottish or
Sorry, what was that, Dave?
Oh, hi, you wee little gobshite.
That's better. That's more Glaswegian as well. Yeah. There you go.
Oh yeah, it is St. Patrick's Day. I forgot about that.
Yeah, it is. It is. I didn't realise that till earlier, till just before the stream when I saw people celebrating it, which I should really know. But yeah, I would have gone and bought myself a Guinness, but instead I'm just on the water tonight. Typical. Anyway. You can take our trees, but you'll never take our freedom!
On that note, let's move on.
Hopefully, I've explained why the statement was unclear. Also, from some of the responses he got, it seemed that they too thought he meant that you could unintentionally lie. For example, lying doesn't need intent. If they ignore factual correction with evidence, that's on them. Are you trying to give an example with your response? If so, well played. If not, read the link. It was quite amusing that I had provided quite a lengthy analysis on lying from SEP, though you could easily get any dictionary definition that shows you need intent to actually be lying. Lie, an intentionally false statement. I took up his offer to discuss and started explaining how his statement was unclear, to which he responded that I didn't understand what he meant. He was talking about verbal communication. So for someone that feels they are clear with their language, they are again being unclear. Sure, when you said they need to know they are lying, even though you spoke about unintentional falsehoods after, the first bit was still not clear, because there's a difference between spreading falsehoods you believe true and spreading falsehoods you know are false. I don't think you understand. When I ask if you care to discuss, I meant speak. There's a disconnect here, and I want to assume you're being honest, so I'd like to speak and try and resolve the disconnect. If you don't want
I have
to,
something
that's
to say about
okay,
that,
but I
actually.
see no room for progress via text.
You just spoke about the fact that you need to intentionally say something false to be lying, but actually there is an exception to that. Fiction. I read a full chapter or two about the philosophy of language of fiction. Specifically, it was an article by, I forgot, Sears. It's a very known philosopher of language. I forgot his name, but basically, he was arguing that fiction is a very special case of this because you are doing what we would call lying, technically speaking. You're intentionally spreading something that may or may not be false,
but not with the intent to deceive. Yes,
that's the important part. But actually, you are also technically deceiving. You're just doing it with the consent of the person you're telling it to. Like when I'm reading a fiction book, I am intentionally participating in the deception of myself, technically.
Yes, and if it's good enough book, sometimes your disbelief will be somewhat suspended and you can be absorbed into this world and actually start believing the things that are going on. But there's still that social contract. I mean, that definition of lying there was a simplistic one.
That's why he said that the difference between telling a lie and telling fiction is that fiction is about imitating the truth. It's not about being the truth.
Yes.
While telling a lie is simply about obfuscating the truth.
Yeah. You're telling an intentionally false statement with the intent to deceive someone, to get them to fully accept it.
It's like a play, right? It's like a play. A play. We all know it's a lie, but it has to be believable.
Yeah.
But when you have a scam artist, like a scam artist, that's a lie. That's not a play. Because a play is fiction, and a scam artist is lying to you.
Yeah.
So you're right with to deceive. That part is important. You cannot just say, "Oh, an intentionally false statement is a lie," because that's not always technically true.
No, that's true. That's true. It's a good thing to point out. I mean, that's.
The dictionary is wrong.
Well, that's why I gave a lengthy analysis on SEP first of all. But it was just like my point there was even then you can. Oh, my brain's going. Sorry. Even then you. So if you have a look in a number of different dictionaries, they do tend to have this with the intent to deceive and everything like that. But my point was to them, like, if they didn't want to actually spend time looking into it or read the paper that I provided on SEP about lying, you can just go to the Google dictionary and you can at least get the bit about it being an intentionally false statement. So I agree with you that the reason it's an intentionally false statement, it's with the intent to deceive. That bit has to be tacked on there. But that's what that intent bit is about. And it should be inferred. I think the dictionary is not being explicit enough there, the Google dictionary.
Interesting part that the dictionary will not mention, because that's philosophy, is that lying is propositional. That is, that you have to affirm or deny something. Like if I said I saw a cat, well, that's not technically a proposition. If I said what you saw is a cat, or what I saw was a cat, that's closer to a proposition, because if you say I like chocolate, that's not a proposition, right? But if you try to do something that you can be true or false, then automatically it becomes a proposition usually. That's why some theories of knowledge have fallen apart, because they are not propositional. I don't know if you know about sense data. Because basically it's the very weird idea that we like get direct knowledge from our senses, basically. It fell apart because it will also mean that you get direct knowledge of categories, which makes no sense. You don't get direct knowledge of color simply from looking at stuff. You get categories from relations between things, which is mental. It's not a direct connection with knowledge, which is why sense datum theories fell apart. But the idea is pretty close to a lot of ideas that other people have in atheist circles, that they don't believe in God because they have no direct evidence of the idea, right?
Yeah.
As if God is the same as a sense datum, something you have direct connection with or not. And that's also very naive, don't you think?
Yeah, most definitely. Yeah, I think when it comes to things like God concepts and a lot of the common arguments, or rejections of arguments, excuses, I guess they are. They're not even proper arguments. They show a serious lack of effort and understanding. A lot of laziness from many of us online, and the amount of energy that goes into some of these battles that happen online for people who haven't cared enough to actually spend much time looking into the topics they're arguing against is somewhat amusing, actually.
Yeah, I personally love theistic philosophy. I think it's very interesting, and if atheists made more effort to read it, to actually read a good historical theistic philosophy, you will be surprised because it's actually very, very thoughtful. It's smart. It's not dumb. Like sometimes I read something and I'm like, wow, that's very good. I don't know what to answer to that because it's just solid, you know. Like if you didn't read
rigorous,
if you didn't read like the Odyssey of Leibniz, it's a whole book that is the whole intention is to be read by atheists to show you stuff like why is God and the Christian tradition three things at once? Isn't that contradictory? And he has like 3 chapters, I think, about that, which he explained. No, it's not contradictory, and here's why. And the explanation he gave me is like pretty good. I was convinced. So yeah, don't assume that because the modern day fundamentalists are terrible at arguing their point, that everyone always was that terrible. I think no, I'm serious. I think nowadays, because there is so many fundamentalists in the U.S. Let's be clear, in the U.S. we have this very distorted idea that religion is that. That's what people associate with it. We associate it with Baptists and Mormons. But when you look historically, I found people in the Middle Age to be more tolerant and more open-minded about religion than those fundamentalists are today. They're not literalists. They don't believe the Bible. Like if you read saints like literal saints, they don't believe the Bible is a one-for-one recreation of the world. They don't believe it's literal. Nobody ever believed that before the fundamentalists came along. Like the average Catholic doesn't believe that.
No, that's true.
The average Protestant either, to be honest.
We've actually had a few conversations with some atheists that were arguing against biblical literalism, and they've proved all of this was the thing. They've proved all of religion false because the Bible isn't literally true. And it's like, okay, so that's one religion, and that's a tiny, tiny number of the people in the religion who believe it's literally true. No, it doesn't matter. I've still proved religion false. No. You may have been able to prove biblical literalism false. That's great. So that's just the biblical literalists. Now what about the people that take a metaphorical take on all of these things? They see this as allegory. They see this, and they go, well, no, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. I proved religion false. And you're like, okay.
What about Buddhism, Shintoism, or Hinduism? Yeah. Right?
I know. Like I do find because Christianity is so big in America, they do seem to conflate Christianity with all religion. And because biblical literalists and fundamentalists and all that are the loudest and proudest over there and cause the most problems, they seem to forget that there are other types of Christians. So they've got this tiny, tiny part of Christianity that they then go, that's all religion. Not just all of Christianity, that's all of religion.
Yeah, also, I don't think this is your case, but there's a big chunk of the atheist community online that is ex-Mormons, ex-Baptists, ex-fundamentalists.
Yes, and they definitely are from America. I think that's where you get the angry ones from.
You have such bad memories of those cults, I think you can call it that you don't really understand that this is their experience, yes, but it's only one experience of a religion. Like many people have very tolerant religion, so to speak. Like when you look at Shintoism, that's a good example. Shintoism is a religion that tolerates most other religions because of the way it's made. In Japan, they tolerate Christianity, they tolerate Islam, they tolerate pretty much any religion because they don't care. They just don't care. It's part of the Shintoist faith now that they're just fine with that.
That's fair. One of the things I actually liked about Hinduism when I was younger was the fact that they just regarded all the other religions as just different aspects of God trying to reach people and helping people reach, a better next life. It's just a different way of doing it. So, you would even have Christian Hindus. I know Christians wouldn't regard them as
if it's not a wasp, you don't want to hear about it.
Question from Honestly Atheist says, if person A intentionally deceives in a tweet and person B retweets that tweet, having been deceived, is person B spreading lies? Oh. They are spreading a lie, but not intentionally, I guess. So what they're doing is they've believed it, so they think it's honest. So they have unintentionally spread a lie, I guess.
I think the only thing we can say for sure is, like, you can say that the person B was careless or was rash.
Yeah.
Because they didn't verify anything. But I don't think
doing their epistemic duty.
Yeah, I don't think we can blame them for lying because they were not the one that did the lie.
Yeah.
Unless they are aware it's a lie and then decide to spread it themselves.
Yeah, but they said having been deceived. But yeah, if they knew it was a lie and spread it, then they're definitely intentionally spreading a lie. But yeah, you're right. I think Dave alluded to it. Yeah, they're being epistemically irresponsible.
Yeah, that's and morally a little bit irresponsible too. Ethically speaking, yeah.
Right, cool. Shall we carry on? Or was there anything from the chat that I need to do? If I've missed your comment, please just send it again and we will carry on.
People are talking a lot about mythology and religion in the chat, from what I see.
Awesome. Oh, I will catch up on it whilst I let this play.
Lone Wolf says, he says something at the topic, sins are useless to contemplate, lies are not inherently bad. We could talk about that. What about the morality of lying? Because we're talking about intentions and lying, so we might as well cover it.
So, lies are not inherently bad. I think this is a difficult one, because could we be in a place where actually there was no lying, so people weren't used to things being sugar-coated, that they weren't used to the pretty lies? If we imagine a world where everyone was always honest all the time, I think we could then say that lying probably would be bad in that paradigm. But I can understand...
Yeah, but it would be...
Sorry, go.
It'd be such a violent society that it would collapse pretty quickly, because you'd be punching everybody and stabbing everybody all the time.
Or would they be more tolerant? Would they be more thick-skinned? If everybody was used to hearing the truth all the time, would they actually just be like, yeah, fair? Like, we are... The more we have to lie to make people happy, the more people get used to this behavior, don't they? So
I think the problem with your hypothesis is it's the same problem with any such first natural state hypothesis that we find in other philosophies, like a lot of contractualists, which is like John Locke, Rousseau, and which is the third one? I always forget it. Hobbes, yeah, Hobbes. Those people like to believe in a first primordial state of no state, right? They like to believe that, like a primordial civilization. But the problem is, not only can we not find evidence of such thing being real, and even if we think about it as a thought experiment, it's meaningless because it forgo what human nature really is.
Yeah, that's fair.
Like we simplify people to such a degree that they are basically tropes. They're not people anymore. They are the trope we have of a political agent, or in your case, of a moral agent. So I think it's a problem with such hypothesis, is that you require from us to forget about a lot of things that make reality what it is. I wish it was useful more than it is, but it shows its limits very fast.
Yeah, that's fair. Is there anything else? Can't you spare someone emotional torment by lying to them about your impending death? Yeah, so that's what I'm saying. I'm like, we would have to be a less feeling society for it to be less of a necessity. And this is what Kevin was saying about it being almost a pointless hypothesis, because we're forgetting what we actually are as humans. So saying, pie in the sky thinking, if no one lied, we could be thicker skinned and we'd be more used to it. But
and I think
the fact
people
of the
forget
matter
that lying is complex. Lying is not just lying directly to someone. Censorship is usually a form of lying, but it's a form that we often consent to. For example, you have children, but you probably agree with the censorship towards children. Most people do, because we understand that children need to be protected from some images and some subject until you are mature enough to understand them.
Yes, I think
But that's
I think
lying.
when they're old enough to ask a question about the topic, they can have it. So I actually remember when my son was 2 or 3, he asked, where babies came from. And I told him actually, I didn't give the lie of the stork or anything like that. I wasn't overly graphic. I was quite plain but scientific with my description. And he burst out laughing and he went, "What, really? No, what actually happens?" Sort of thing. But I think that I think we tell too many lies to our kids. I think that we do hide so much from them. But I do agree that there is a certain amount, like, things shouldn't necessarily be thrust in their face.
You're not going to show them porn. That's the point.
Exactly.
And another instance of censorship, this time toward adults, is violent censorship. When you watch the news, we don't see videos of people killing themselves. We don't see that.
No.
And there's 2 reasons for it. The first is respect for the victim's family, but that's still censorship. And the second one is people don't like to see such graphic things, don't want to be traumatized by it. So even though we all know that we are technically supposed to all be adults watching the news, they're not supposed to be children watching the news, technically speaking. We don't want to see it anyway, and we're fine with that. We're fine with that type of censorship.
Yep.
Which is why when people ask me if I'm for freedom of speech, freedom of speech, and I said, yeah, but that doesn't mean I'm against censorship. I'm against some form of censorship, and I'm against unjustifiable censorship. But if the censorship is justified and restrained, I'm fine with it.
In short, if there's good reason, then that's fine.
Might be okay, yeah.
Yeah. That's fine. Though I suppose, would you also be okay for having, say, if you had 2 news channels running exactly the same, and one of them was uncensored and one of them was censored, and someone could choose,
I'd be fine with that, yes.
So
I think that's fine.
Yeah. Because then you're getting the actual complete freedom, and you're getting that freedom of choice. I mean, most people would probably go uncensored.
There was this story like a year ago about a guy that shot himself in the face with a shotgun, and my curiosity brought me to look for the original video, uncensored, and yeah, it was graphic, but I wasn't traumatized by it myself. But I know some people who might be. Like, the thing I thought about was more funny than traumatizing for me. I thought it looked like a watermelon exploded. That's what I thought, and that's a bit silly, I know, but I wasn't traumatized, and I know as a child I might have found it disturbing. Yeah.
He's a psychopath.
I can relate. I used to hunt out stuff like Faces of Death.
So, Joe, are you gonna uncensor yourself and tell us about your love of Jeebus?
What's that?
Apologist memes. Because you keep getting called an apologist online.
Yeah, well, you see, I will one day, when we've got enough of a following, I plan to have a revelation.
I can feel the Christian upset about the idea of planning a revelation.
You see, I'm Joseph. What do you think I called my son?
You didn't call him Jesus for real, though.
No, but it would have been
funny. That would have been funny, yeah.
No, it was called Logan.
That's a good name, though.
Right, let's carry on with the video. The main issue, apart from lack of clarity, is his instant "I don't think you understand." He's right. I didn't understand. His method of communication here seemed like I should have known he meant speech when he said discuss. We were already having a discussion on Twitter, a microblogging and discussion platform. There was no way for me to know he meant verbal communication, as he was not specific. He was not clear. He could have easily phrased it as, "Sorry, I misspoke. By discuss, I meant a verbal chat." It would have seemed like someone who was at least some way open to the fact that maybe they're not as clear as they thought they were. I was unsure of their intents here, but I do agree verbal chat can sometimes be clearer, even if my ADHD can make following hard sometimes. I did have to decline due to the time, but said he could come on a future free-for-all stream or just a private Discord chat, but we have yet to engage further. On that, though, I'm less enthused to engage with him further after the experience you had with him, Dave.
I thought that might be infidel. It was, wasn't it?
Before we move on, do you want to address
He's
the
blocked
comment?
out for a reason. We don't name and shame Dave.
Do you want to address the
Right.
comment by Steen, the last one on the chat? He says, lying to children is the indoctrination. It is intentional and preferential information meant to protect a child. Indoctrination exists on a scale. Do you want to discuss this, or we just skip it?
No, go for it. You can broach that one first if you like.
Okay, I completely disagree. I'm sorry. I think you misunderstand that indoctrination. First of all, indoctrination has a very negative connotation. We tend to think it's brainwashing, but technically you could just say that it is enculturation, to be more precise. Like, the fact that we're lied to is a good thing, actually, because I think you're taking this position in the same way that Plato is against art. And I'm going to explain myself. Like, if you ever read Plato's, you might have learned that Plato's doesn't like poets, it doesn't like art, it doesn't like anything at all about this, because he said it's about learning to lie to falsehoods, right? It's about learning to lie, to believe in lies. But the problem with that is that you forget that lies and falsehoods are all we learn to discern the truth.
Mm-hmm.
The only reason we know that as culture and our painting is a false is because we are able to discern it as such. So if we never lie to children, they're actually going to be the worst people ever to be able to understand what is or what isn't a lie. We actually have to lie to children for them to learn what lying is, to begin with, first of all. And two, I think it's good for us to learn to lie to children when it's reasonable to do so. Like, we all know about the fact sometimes parents lie just because they don't have the time to explain something. And yes, it's a bit lazy, but it's also efficient. Like, you say a quick lie and later you correct it. It's not necessarily evil to do so. It's not indoctrination either. And if you tell a fairy tale like the Santa Claus, serve a purpose. At least the fairy tale is entertaining. Like, we all know fireworks are false; they're illusions, but we still enjoy those illusions. So I don't think that lying to children is necessarily bad.
That's fair.
Sorry, it's my opinion.
Yeah, that's fair. Did you have anything you wanted to add to that, Dave?
No, that was really well put.
That was very platonic. Yeah, sure.
Lone Wolf mentioned we should do a stream on indoctrination. Yeah, we said earlier, in fact, we had a conversation on WhatsApp that we are planning on doing that. We're just not sure whether we're going to do it on a SciPhi stream or one of Luke's Monday streams, but we're definitely doing it. Steen agrees, yes, we should. Well, I mean, we can all get on and have the discussion, maybe open it up to more people. So Kimmo asked the question, doesn't indoctrination require a doctrine? An isolated line might not qualify. I don't think it necessarily needs a doctrine, but something to be treated almost as dogma. It's got to be something that can't be contested. You're not allowed to think about it, and
it's an attitude more than anything, if we're honest.
Yeah, and I think as well today we almost see proper indoctrination having an element of abuse to it as well. So, which again, I agree with you. An isolated lie might not qualify, but I mean, it does depend on how loose your definition of indoctrination is. If you go back far enough, it did just basically mean teaching. So you go back now to imbue someone's mind with an idea. I mean, shit, everything's indoctrination under that definition. And actually, you could even make an argument that, early schooling is basically indoctrination. You're not allowed to contest what the teacher tells you. They give it to you. It's fact. Why is that? That's because that's what it is. That's what it says in the textbook. That's why I said
it has a bad connotation, but when you think about it, in itself, it's fine. That's why I said that I said the word enculturation, because that's the word sociologists use now, because they know indoctrination has a bad reputation.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. Honestly, Atheist, do you all have an Air Discord? Yes, we do. There should be a link to it on the YouTube page on the right-hand side. If that link isn't working, though, remind me after the stream, and I'll post it on Twitter.
I put one in the chat.
Oh, Dave's already done it. Wicked, thank you, Dave. Yeah, so Rev says indoctrination is basically making someone accept something without critical thinking. That's it. You're not allowed to contest it. You're not allowed to think of it. You're not allowed to engage your critical thinking skills, and so on and so forth. There you go, Dave's thing. Can you be indoctrinated with the truth? Yes. There you go. You can be indoctrinated to accept evolution without questioning it, without thinking about it. You can be indoctrinated to accept anything. So, yeah. And you could even do it in the absolute worst way, the incredibly abusive way that you can be indoctrinated, or it could just be done in no, you will accept this. I mean, you think back to the school example that I gave earlier. A lot of your early schooling is basically indoctrination. You love it when I use one of your joke comments as a serious comment. I've got no clue when they're serious or not.
Sarcasm is another form of colloquialism. So.
Yeah, and I thought Americans didn't get sarcasm, so how am I supposed to know if you're joking?
He watches British TV shows, though.
He does actually, more than me. Yeah, to be fair, I remember that from a previous
sarcasm on British TV, don't you?
No.
It's our only form of humor,
We're dry, miserable bastards. What do you expect? Unless we go outside, then we're absolutely soaked.
Yeah, the weather's wet, our humor is dry.
That's a good one. I never heard that
one. Right, we'll carry on. And press play. Unused. Whilst I mentioned that all language is defined through use, and have said a number of times before that any definition of a word is valid, it doesn't always make it useful. Desley has a very specific use in our circle, but it has no use for the wider world to understand us. That is true for any word. If you want to define knowledge as a four-wheeled road vehicle that is powered by an engine and is able to carry a small number of people, and you say you have knowledge, that's fine. But you'd probably be describing what others would call a car, and therefore you're not going to be easily understood. Some use of language catches on, though. The broadening of terminology. Let's pretend for a moment that Desley catches on. Everyone is now using Desley to refer to the Tony Hawk's games. What happens when people start broadening the terminology? What if Desley suddenly means any skate game? We actually see this happening. In the UK, we tend to call all vacuum cleaners Hoovers, even though that was once just a brand. I didn't actually know they were not called Hoovers till I travelled to America, and no one knew what I was talking about. We do the same with rolling papers. They all get referred to as Rizla, which again is a brand of rolling paper. But what about when these terms start to become even broader? Let's imagine Desley now starts to become all board sports, so it will include things like snowboarding and wakeboarding. That would be like using Hoover to also include things like broom and mop This would still be valid because this is how language works, but it's less clear what people are talking about. We can no longer infer that they are talking about Tony Hawks or even skating. All we can infer is they are talking about some form of board sport. What happens if this goes a step further and we start to think of all extreme sports as deadly? That's like using Hoover to refer to all cleaning apparatus. Again, this is still valid use, but we've gone from deadly being a shorthand way of saying Tony Hawk's pro skater to now being used to a catch-all for extreme sports, which is already a catch-all. This might seem silly, but this happens with language all the time. Take atheism and agnosticism, for example. These are polysemous terms with a rich history. All the various uses of these terms are valid because that is how language works, but some are more useful than others. If we start with how the terms are usually used within philosophy of religion today and move on from there, we can see the term becoming broader in various circles. Theism and its negation, atheism, are ontological positions. Theism is the proposition God or gods exist, and atheism is the proposition gods do not exist. Therefore, a theist would accept theism and reject atheism, and vice versa for an atheist. An agnostic would be unable to conclude either way and therefore suspend judgment on the proposition. This means that they don't believe gods exist, but they also don't believe gods do not exist. So to summarize, a theist believes that at least one god exists, an agnostic is unsure if a god does or does not exist, and an atheist believes gods do not exist. Both the agnostic and atheist are types of non-theist, and both the theist and agnostic are types of non-theist. Atheist, even. There have been some that have argued over the years and still today that anyone who has considered the proposition and provided an epistemic answer that includes not believing God exists should be an atheist. This would make both the agnostic and the atheist a form of atheist. This is sometimes a split referred to as weak and strong atheism or negative and positive atheism. The irony being there were two clear positions that got melded together that now need a modifier so you can tell the difference between the two. There are some that take this a step further and will say that any responsive non-believer should count as an atheist. For example, there are those that find the God character so ill-defined and incoherent it would be meaningless to consider it. This is known as being agnostic. They technically don't believe, but rather than answer the proposition, their statement is about the proposition. There are other types of non-theists like this also that would be included. It's now become even harder to identify what someone means by atheist here, but it goes further. There are a few more types of non-theist. There are those that are completely absent of belief that a god exists or any state in regard to the proposition. This is either because they have never been introduced to the concept or because they are infants. An infant's mind is not developed enough to consider the proposition of God's existence nor hold any belief position in regard to it. We're now at the point where the entire set of non-theists are regarded as atheists. We can no longer accurately infer anything about their position other than an absence of belief in deities. It's a set that already exists, much like the extreme sports already existed before in the Desley example. But it doesn't stop there either. Some folks think that anything with a brain that doesn't believe in gods is an atheist, and will assert that all animals are atheists. How they know animals don't hold those beliefs is a mystery, but it's probably a fair assumption. This is semantics being used as propaganda. I am an atheist since birth. That most people are not does not mean that it's not the default. All animals are born atheist. It's indoctrination that changes that. I just want to say something here, okay? I was a theist at one point, and I was never indoctrinated. I think you can become a theist without being indoctrinated. There are people who have experiences. They're just in a place. There might be other theists around them, and they're not theists themselves. They might even be hardcore atheists, and something happens, and they have an experience, and they're like, "Oh my god!" Quite literally. And so,
I think you have a point because a few years ago, I used to be a staunch anti-theist. For some reason, even I'm not very religious actually. They are, but like he never forced me to be religious. He never talked about it either. I just hated religion. I thought it was irrational and justified, and it hurt people, etc. But the more I learn about philosophy, and the more I read about theology and philosophy of religion, the more open to it I became. I'm still an atheist. I don't believe in God. But now I'm open to the idea of believing in God, and I don't think you are an idiot for doing so.
Yeah, that's
I
fair.
think actually that the biggest obstacle for me to believe in God is I don't have the faith component. I could rationalize God. I could do it easily. I think many philosophers have done such a good work that if I wanted to take one definition of God and believe in it, I could, but I don't have faith in it. I only like rationalize it, which to me doesn't seem to be the faith that religion is about. Like it's not about believing in God the same way I believe in the definition of a word, isn't it? I don't think it's that way, because otherwise I could just define God as the universe and believe in it.
There are some that do that.
Yeah, Spinozism is a good example of that because it's pretty. Deism is close to that, and I could be a deist easily, but I don't really think that's how theists view it. I think theists view religion as a relationship with the divine, and I don't feel that relationship. And that's why when I read some philosophers that say, no, theism and deism are different because theists have a relationship with God, deists don't. I understand that. I could be a deist, I think, but I could not be a theist. so confusing, isn't it? Anyway, I could not be a theist because theists have a relationship with God, or Jesus, or whatever, or the Hindu gods, whichever deity to believe in, and I don't. You don't either. But we could rationalize it, I think. I think that's the easier part, actually, contrary to what some atheists believe. Some atheists believe rationalizing God is difficult. No, I think it's easy.
Yeah.
I think the harder part is believing in a relationship with something you don't have any direct contact with. I think that's the hardest part.
Yeah, that's fair. I also think that as much as you could rationalize and make rational arguments, could you really convince yourself to wholly believe it? Like, I don't think that I necessarily could. I mean,
I think we already do, though. I think we already do. With everything about science and empiricism, we have to admit at some fundamental level that we just believe in it.
Oh, I agree. No, I completely agree. There is something there. No, I agree with that. But I mean, I think I could make some rational arguments for gods, for example. But I don't think I could convince myself to actually believe them. You know, I could understand if a theist used those arguments and as why they believed, I could go, well, yeah, okay, they're a rational theist, even though I disagree with their conclusion. You know, but that's the thing. I find so many other arguments more convincing the other way that I don't think just me rationalizing a god these days, maybe like 15, 20 years ago, I could have done this rationalization and become, you know, like really firm in theism and been like, yes.
But maybe I should share with you another article about epistemic diversity, which explained this conundrum of why theists have such an easy time believing in stuff by revelation and stuff. But if you have a more scientific mind, you think that's mumbo jumbo and doesn't mean anything. Because technically speaking, we make a choice. We make a choice that some things are better justification than others. You and I made that choice. We believe that the justification of faith and revelation is inferior to, say, an empirical data-backed justification. And that's fine. There's no... The thing that's like epistemologists argue about is, are we justified in doing such work and being so intolerant of other justification systems? Some people say yes. Some people say we should be more tolerant, which is the epistemological diversity part, which says we don't have to agree, we don't have to crush each other, but we should just coexist. That's like the EP stance on it. But others says no, we should totally impose and dominate for the best, for our best interest, to be honest, which is the more conflictual approach.
Yeah.
I don't know on which feet you dance on that stance. Do you think we should tolerate theists, or that ultimately we will have to impose ourselves with the scientific framework and everything?
I've got no problems with theism and theists in general. I mean, it's only when they start doing bad things in the name of theism, and then I think that's generally bad people or incredibly devout people lost their belief. I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with theism or religion. I think there's a lot of positives that come from religion as well.
But that's morally speaking. I meant epistemologically speaking. I meant
right,
like knowledge-wise.
I think with certain gods, then maybe.
Faith?
I think maybe with certain gods, because they are at least seemingly so demonstrably false. They're so demonstrably erroneously.
I think the problem of faith-based epistemology is that it lacks the most important part of an epistemological justification: shareability. You cannot share faith. You can embrace faith together, but you don't share it.
Yeah, that's fair.
And that's something that many philosophers have noted, like even very theistic one, like Kierkegaard. Soren Kierkegaard says faith is individual. You don't share it ultimately, which is why he says it's fine to embrace the epistemological scientific view, because he says it never was about knowledge anyway. He said, I don't care. He said he doesn't mind if it's not about knowledge ultimately. And he says that religion is about morality ultimately, and I think I agree with that. I think he has a point. And I think if most people and the atheist circles understood that when people make when people make claims about God, usually mean it more in a spiritual and a moral way, and that the claims about like God made the universe 6,000 years ago, whatever. Besides the fundamentalists, it's all metaphors. It's all about a message, a lesson, like a fable, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think in that way, it's true that religion is more about teaching us stuff than being about understanding the world.
Yeah, no, I'd agree. And I think a lot of Christians see it that way. They see so much of it as you mentioned, like Aesop's fables. And I think that there are some good morals that you can get from the Bible. We did a stream actually. It was one of our 10 questions responses, and it was, "What's your favorite verse or story from the Bible?" And there were some great ones brought up there by the theists that responded to it. And it was just like, look, see, there are some good morals in here. Yeah, cool. There's tons of evil crap in there as well. Right, whatever. But there is some good, and these theists, they tend to extrapolate the good, or they explain why the bad is in there. Don't
throw the baby with the bathwater.
Yeah.
Because ultimately theism is like everything else. It has its good and bad.
Yeah.
Like, if people wanted to attack science, they can do it easily. We all know about terrible things that were done in the name of scientific pursuit, right?
Oh yeah,
like torture, experiments on children or animals.
I mean, especially if you go to like World War II and stuff as well. Yeah. So a question from Honestly Atheist. It says, is there any disagreement that non-theism is actually the appropriate default position? I'd say it's not actually a position at that site. So there's different types of non-theism. And I think you're born completely ignorant, right? You lack the cognitive abilities to consider the proposition God exists, and hold or lack any position one way or another. So you're not holding a position. You're at this point, it's the state of non-theism rather than a position of non-theism. It's like one step before sort of thing. So yes, the default state is a form of non-theism. But throughout our evolution, we are actually prone to assigning agency and superstition and paranoia and things like that. So our default state is non-theism with a tendency to believe these things. So we are more prone to believe in gods and religions and things like that than not. And it takes further thinking and understanding to actually change our thinking away from being like that.
Speaking of, if I wanted to be pedantic, do you know about the myth of duration?
The what, sorry?
The myth of duration.
No.
I think Dave is probably familiar with it because it's a Davidian thing. It's basically the idea that duration, the idea that things happen over time, is a myth. And that may sound weird, but technically speaking, the only way we did that's all about a passage in Hume's work where he tried to explain to us that things like identity and change are obscure and unintelligible concepts. They don't make sense. Because if you think about it, identity is about complex, simple parts making complex things that we decide are one thing, even though they are multiple things, and it can change, but also not change over time, and it's very confusing. But like, basically the gist of it is time and change are probably just illusions. So if you believe that someone is born non-theist and become a theist, I could just answer, well, time is an illusion. There is no, time is an illusion. Duration is an illusion. So you're technically never the same at any point in your life. You're always different. So to say you always were a non-theist is absurd because you're always different at every instant. Like, there is no defined way to say that someone become a theist. Like, what is the transition period, right? You start believing in God. How much can you measure that? Can you measure belief in God? How much must you believe to become a believer?
I'm sure you could look at the brain under fMRI or something like that, and certain things light up and all of that. But I don't know enough.
You have to interpret it that way. You have to interpret that as
yes, of course, yeah.
Which is a problem in itself. So I think when we talked about it before, that basically the position you and I have is we don't have a position as a theist or an atheist as a rock or a baby, because those entities either lack the ability to have beliefs or are in a state where you're not able to own the belief. Yeah. So they are undetermined on that front, or unapplicable, like in a rock. Rocks cannot be theist or atheist.
No, they're in the set of cannot be.
Because I think the problem with the word non-theist that you use is not you, but Ra uses also that a non-theist, if you use it in the broadest sense, can be literally everything that's not a theist. Like the same way if I say non-plant, well, any animal, my microphone is a non-plant too. But that doesn't help anyone. That's not informational. Sorry, that's not epistemologically useful. That's the word.
It doesn't focus on the properties that make it what it is.
It doesn't help anyone. It's useless. It's meaningless. So that's why when we say, if I say non-plant, I'm probably referring to it in a context where it's limited. I'm not using it at the broadest sense possible, which is the same with non-theist. Non-theist is in a limited scope about beliefs, not literally everything that's not a theist. Because that's just absurd, isn't it?
Yeah, I agree. Honestly, Atheist says, I'm not sure I'm understanding this distinction between position and state. So a position is like you're taking a position. Consider, right, a football field. There's a bunch of positions that people can be on a football field, right? They're all there as part of the football field. But the default state is that you're not on that field at all. So you don't have a position on the field. You're not even at the game, man. Right? That's about as simply as I can think to explain it right now. But I do actually have an article on Answers in Reason called "The Problem with Atheism is the Default Position Style Arguments," that goes through all of these different arguments that you hear, and it does explain that a little bit more, and it talks about Ra's position, and it talks about the relationship with things like ist and ism and all of that. So, I mean, if you are interested, it's probably a quicker read than this one. And Dave says, a position is some idea or claim is something we take after hearing that idea or claim, whereas a state is just simply something that is. Yeah. It's a good way to put it.
I only have 200 characters to put this stuff in, so...
But yeah, so there is there's a bit, there's the nuance there, you know. This is what I was trying to say though, with the whole, you know, you're actually taking a position rather than, Yeah. Not even being at the game. But yeah. So anyway, shall we carry on?
Yeah.
You think that's absurd? Well, it doesn't stop there. Some people take things further and state not only non-theist and animals are atheists, but anything in the set of not able to be a theist is atheist too. That means rocks, viruses, buildings, books, vegetables, etc. are all atheist. We now have a set that's so broad that the word atheist has lost pretty much all its power. It's pretty useless in discussion, and you have to caveat it so much to explain your specific position. And here we have the quite famous Aaron Ra claiming that rocks are atheist. The word atheist is used by so many people in so many different ways that we can no longer infer what someone means and have to constantly stipulate our use. You then have people that claim certain definitions are wrong and that there is only one definition. What used to be a label that clearly explains someone's position on the topic is now incredibly muddy and often gets hung up on a semantic battle over what the word means instead of focusing on the actual topic you wanted to discuss. So, in summary, we can see that a common language can be a problem. There is often a language barrier we don't realize is there. We all think we are being clear, especially when speaking our first language to someone that is speaking their first language. But unless we are open to the fact that we might not actually be speaking the same dialect, or that what is clear inside our heads might not be as clear as we think to others, then we have made it hard to overcome the barrier and communicate effectively. The purpose of this article was to address the hidden language barrier within English-speaking tongues, e.g., the English you are speaking may not be the same English as someone else. People creating a language barrier using private language, technical language, scientific or philosophical language in ways that these terms are not defined within science or philosophy. People assuming that they are being clear. People thinking they are definitely clear because of an in-group bias. The broadening of terminology, which results in the term becoming muddy, it being used for terms that already exist, people making silly statements, it losing impact, and it ending up with a semantic battle instead of focusing on the more important topics at hand. This is how language works. The problem is when people don't keep these things in mind when they approach conversations, and they end up focusing on things that don't matter or just reasserting they are right or are being clear when that isn't the case. I do hope I've managed to communicate effectively, though I am aware that the folks that preview my articles before I send them out are part of my language bubble, and therefore will hold a greater understanding of what I am saying than those outside the bubble might. I also hope the examples I provided were useful, and I managed to show that it's easy to be unclear no matter how clear we might believe ourselves to be, whilst explaining the language barrier and the issue with colloquialisms and overly broad definitions. If I have been unclear, then please ask me for clarification, and, if needed, I can alter this article. Brilliant. I'll stop sharing then. You are presenting, am I? There we go, that's the button. Hey. And there we go. Only took us 2 hours to go through a 20-minute video. That's pretty good going for us.
Considering it took us 2 hours to go through a 3-minute video last week.
Yeah. That was brilliant.
By the way, I just wanted to give my source for when I was talking about the myth of duration and stuff like that.
Oh, yeah.
It's Treatise on Human Nature by Davidian, book 1, section 4, chapter 4, section 3 and 4.
Nice one. Thank you very much for that. So, yeah, I mean, that was a pretty interesting discussion. I think there's a lot to take away from it, and there's obviously a lot more discussed from what we were talking about there. We've got a few questions coming in as well. Where is it? There was one about logical contradictions. I'm trying to bring it up on screen.
Is there even such a thing as a logical contradiction? I think it was.
Yeah. So,
yeah,
Dave, Why didn't you take that up? Because that one is going to be a practice question for Saturday.
Well, of course, there could be logical contradictions. Something can't be both true and false at the same time.
There you go.
Like, that's a simple one.
Yeah.
You can't have something that's red all over and green all over. That's another logical contradiction.
Exactly.
There's plenty of them.
But as we did discuss in our thing with Philip on dialetheism and paraconsistent logic, there are sometimes within human circumstances where you can actually have a true contradiction. So an example of that would be, say, if one law was created that said no men are allowed in this building, but then there was another law that said everyone under 25 has to come into this building on Sunday. All of a sudden, you've got a contradiction in the man-made system. But generally, other than in man-made systems, you don't get these true contradictions.
Have I told you about the concept of...
that's loud.
Sorry, it must be the ambulance. Have I told you about the
Kevin
concept
was about to be raided.
Have I told you about the concept of moral evidence before? Because it's relevant to what you're talking about.
No, go for it.
Okay, so basically in philosophy there is three main type of evidence we recognize. And by evidence, I must specify, I'm not using evidence in the English way as the synonym, sorry, very annoying, as the synonym for proof, but I'm meaning evidence like I use in French, that is the old English way, like demonstration, so to speak.
Right, okay.
Okay, so moving on. The first one is the one that Dave mentioned, that is logical evidence, which is also translated as metaphysical evidence. Basically, something that is metaphysically impossible is something that is logically impossible.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have what we will call physical evidence or empirical evidence. That's something that is not about logic, but about real life, about real experimentation. A good example of that is saying that if I say I can teleport to the moon, that is empirically impossible. There's no way I can teleport to the moon by snapping my fingers. But metaphysically speaking, that's not impossible. I didn't break any law of physics. I didn't break any logical law. It's technically possible on a metaphysical level. And our siren, by the way, sorry, distraction. And then the third one, which is the one that people use the least of, but is technically the more useful one, is moral evidence. Moral evidence is when we take into account human behavior, something that is so outlandish that it is absurd to believe it is possible. The most obvious example of that is conspirationist. When they say that conspiration usually requires so much conspiring, so much collusion, that it is unthinkable to think so many people will work together to befuddle us, to manipulate and obfuscate the truth, right? It's just too much to consider. An example my teacher gave is not even a conspiration. It's like, imagine if someone told you that he doesn't believe that Rome exists, that Rome is where we're told it is, because he never went to Rome. And if he went to Rome, he wouldn't believe the sign that says it is Rome. That's morally impossible. Why will people lie about that? There's no reason to believe that. And even if you could conceive reasons for lying, and like I said, that's technically empirically possible, that every sign in Rome is a false one, and that you're just in another city and you didn't know of it, that's possible. That's also metaphysically possible, but it's not morally possible. It doesn't make sense on a moral scale.
Well, actually, what you bring up there, a lot of people say that about Australia. The flat earthers say that about Australia, don't they? So what you're doing there, you're using Rome, but I mean, that's a very genuine take that actually we do see people proclaiming that, you know, you go up in the plane for ages, but that's them sorting out the stage below, and then you land somewhere and you're not actually in Australia, and they you know, so yeah. And as you say, what the fuck?
I think that's what's funny is a lot of people neglect moral evidence, because if you have a very scientific mind, you might think that's like not real evidence. And like I said, I'm using evidence in the old English way. Look it up in the somewhere. There's probably the explanation for what it means. I'm sorry, I cannot use a better word for it. It's just that English doesn't use the old definition of evidence anymore. And old texts, like text by Davidian, for example, it is used this way. It is used the old way. which is the way that French and German still use it. So I know it can be confusing because you have proof in mind, but by evident, I mean something that is evident. Sorry, that might be the easiest way to explain.
The way I tend to see evidence is anything that raises or lowers the probability of a conclusion being true or false. So
yeah, that's proof. That's proof. I meant like something that is evident.
As you say, it's something that's sort of self-evident.
Moral evident. It just doesn't sound right. Empirical evident. Yeah, because it is evident that logical contradictions are impossible. Yeah. It is evident that it is impossible empirically to teleport to the moon by snapping my fingers. And it is morally evident that it is impossible that everyone is lying about Rome being where it is. But a lot of people neglect those evident things. They don't believe those. They just believe one of those. If you're very, very strict, you might only believe in two empirical things that are possible and neglect the moral part, which is what conspirationists do. When you look at conspiracy theories, they are, generally speaking, possible. They're not impossible. It could be true, but only on an empirical level. Like, is it possible that we fake going to the moon? Technically speaking, yes. Morally speaking, no. That's as simple as that, honestly.
Yeah. I mean, I was just trying to think. what morally speaking, what would have the purpose been for something like that to have been fake?
You could conceive one. I mean, some conspirationists do have answers for that. The problem is it still remains morally improbable.
Most definitely. And if you go back to applying, Occam's razor to it, you just cut away that straight away. It's yeah. So were there any more questions in the chat? Was there anything else you guys wanted us to cover off tonight?
Well, I wanted to ask what is Sunday exactly? What are you doing Sunday?
Oh no, it's on Saturday. So on Saturday,
yeah.
Dave and I are going on Godless Granny's channel. It's at 7 a.m. Eastern, which is 1 p.m. our time or something like that. I think I've got it in my calendar.
If you go on YouTube, it shows it being 12 p.m. our time. Yeah.
Oh, really?
It was originally said 1 p.m., but the clocks have just gone back over there.
Oh, shit.
Oh, yeah, daylight saving time.
Yeah. At least where she is. I think it's the same in EST as well.
Yeah, it should be at the same time zone.
Yeah. Should I? I might have to let her know that it needs to be pushed back an hour, and she can get an hour in bed.
I meant to tell you earlier and forgot.
Yeah, no, because I've got it in my calendar right there.
You said on Godless Granny channel.
I did.
Right?
Yeah, I got it there at 1 o'clock.
I look it up. I look it up.
But yeah, no, she's responded to our 10 questions for atheists, and we've had her on a lot of times. She's had a lot of clear thoughts on things, and she's been really interesting hearing her perspective. And Dave actually went on to discuss moral realism a little while ago.
It was 1 a.m, though, so I was a bit fuzzy.
Yeah, not to mention you had people hammering you from the chat, and Danny jumped on as well, and he was definitely a lot more awake than you were.
Yeah, it was good that he did jump on.
Yeah, you're not lucky doing this so late. I mean, me is like 7 o'clock right now, 7 p.m.
Yeah, it's 11 for us. I mean, sometimes we do go later. I mean, Dave and I were just planning our response the other day on Tuesday, and we were up till like 1:30 just going through the videos and comments and things like that. We didn't actually even get to recording that one. So yeah, I mean, we do sometimes stream late. I think the latest I've done like a 7 or 8 hour stream.
4 days.
By the way, Joe, I sent you the article about argument backfiring.
Oh yeah. I
sent it to you on Twitter, and I'm sure you're going to enjoy it. It's only 9 pages, it's not very long.
Oh, awesome. I look forward to it. Need something to get me to sleep tonight.
I think you like it because you will probably find which one corresponds to wrong, actually.
Oh, yeah.
Because the author described multiple times of bad arguers, how people are totally, and you can pretty much categorize anyone you argued with ever.
Awesome. I'm just trying to carry on with the chat. It's a lot of conversation with each other, which is great. I'm glad you guys are getting on with each other too.
I just want to correct Ansrida. You said a contradiction, something that cannot be true because it refutes its premises. Technically, that's not always true. If you go into more complex logics, it's possible for a contradiction to be true, actually. I won't go into the details because that's like more advanced, but technically, you can have contradictions that are true in more advanced logics.
Yes, well, that's like I was talking about with the within a human system earlier. Like generally speaking, it's one of those things. It's why you have the law of non-contradiction as one of the laws of logic. It's just that there are times where that doesn't apply, but
well, that's one of the laws of one set of logic. There is more than one.
Yeah, goddamn
fuzzy logic doesn't answer to that. I'm sorry to say. I did study some of it. Like I had intermediate level logic classes. That's only intermediate level. I cannot even begin to imagine what advanced level is.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah, same. I just did just getting to the intermediate, but that was about it.
Yeah, it's already quite difficult.
It is, yeah.
It's almost like, philosophers do put a hell of a lot of work in that people don't realize.
Well, when you look at
I printed my degrees off the internet.
People have you seen historical philosophers or much things to do at once? Like Descartes was a mathematician, a physicist, a doctor apparently. Like he was a lot of things. And sure, people don't do that as much anymore. Like you don't see someone doing literally everything. But that doesn't mean that philosophy doesn't attract smart people. It certainly does.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, you look at someone like Hume or even look at somebody like Pascal. He did stuff like The Wager. He did other philosophy, but he was also an amazing mathematician.
Yeah. Hume was known as a very famous historian, actually, in his time. He was known more for his as an historian, but he was known as a philosopher. He had a very good reputation with his historical stuff, and I read some of it, and it's good for the time, actually. One of the things I think might be interesting in a future discussion is the fact that, have you noticed, Dave, that philosophers never cite their source ever in the past? I mean,
in the past, no.
Don't do it.
They just went with, here you go, this is what I think. I might have borrowed some ideas from previous, but who doesn't? This is my thoughts on it.
The only time you will mention their peers if they are directly answering to someone.
Yeah. This person was wrong with this.
And you will usually quote them. You will usually quote the part you don't like, which is interesting because nowadays, if you don't cite reference and show your source for everything, it's like an intellectual crime nowadays.
It's plagiarism, or
but at the time,
you'll fail any assignment.
Normal, and I think it might be an interesting discussion to say what we consider morally acceptable epistemologically, if you know what I mean, like moral epistemology, moral science. What is scientifically moral to do? Like morally, you know what I'm trying to say, right? Like, how can we be good people but good scientists and good philosophers too? Like, how do we do that?
I mean, there can be conflicts. It's one of the things. There's not necessarily an ethical way to test ethics. Like, if you wanted to test all the different ethical theories, you'd have to lock people off into certain things and sort of almost indoctrinate them into certain ways of life to make sure this particular moral theory was the only one they thought about.
It's so complicated too. Like, we were speaking about epistemology a bit earlier, and a lot of people think epistemology is not epistemology. I mean ethics. You said ethics. People think ethics is only deontology versus consequentialism. But the problem with those two is they are what we call in epistemology an epistemology of the action. They are about moral action, but they are ethics. Sorry, I'm confused. There are ethics focused on the individual and the agent, which is what ethics or virtue are. And a lot of derivatives, like ethics of responsibility, are about the agent and not the action you do. So it's false to say that ethics is only that, or epistemology is only that, because there are nuances everywhere, and there are alternatives, and originality is flourishing in those fields. There's always something new.
Yeah, and I must admit, I mean, I really, really like ethical discussions. It's the thing that
I like epistemology and ethics. That's my two fields.
Fair. I mean, they're both very interesting, and there is the crossover of the two, really. But yeah, I just find that, like, especially with ethics, there's so much real world application to it. You know, so much real world discussion, so much you can actually think about. And I think that's probably why it's, at least so far, my favorite area that I've looked into. But I mean, unlike you guys, I'm just a layperson that's just got a casual interest and no time. Whereas you guys have spent, a hell of a lot of time studying this. You know a hell of a lot more than me, so I'll always defer to you guys.
I don't think you should undersell yourself like that, because a lot about philosophy is about your attitude. If you go into philosophy with the wrong attitude, you'll always suck at it. Like, some of my peers struggle all the way because they never are enough open-minded to understand what the teacher is saying to them. Like, I remember one of my third class, it was about Kierkegaard, and the teacher keep telling us nonstop, remember that when Kierkegaard is talking about Christianity, he's talking about his understanding of Christianity at his time, not yours. So don't view it like from an Americanized perspective, as many Quebecers do, actually. Don't view it as fundamentalist, because Kierkegaard is not a fundamentalist, and he's not your average Christian. So he was like, I forgot what he was. He was a very specific type of Christian.
He was a Jesuit?
No, he was something else, like a Lutheran, I think, Lutheranism. I forgot what it was. Like, it was a very specific kind of. Yeah, it's a very specific kind of Christianism, and the teacher kept telling us, but a lot of people didn't listen. And when he wrote their essays, he made a mistake on understanding it from our perspective, which meant he misunderstood. And the same thing happened with Descartes. Descartes made an argument for God, right? He said that God exists as a metaphysical necessity, which is an interesting argument. But a lot of people in my class, atheists, were not taking it. They were like, well, but that's not true, blah, 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 right? We're arguing against that. The problem was they were arguing in bad faith. They were not even open to the idea that Descartes might have a point.
Just to clarify a previous point about Kierkegaard, he was a Lutheran pietist.
Thank you.
That's it, yeah.
Yeah.
I was mixing him up for Descartes.
But you see my point, like, people need to be open-minded, and I'm using a religious example because those are good examples. We like to think that the intolerant nowadays are religious people, but as you and I and Dave have talked about at length, atheists can be just as much or even more intolerant if you don't think about it.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Like, it's about your attitude. If you come into a discussion with the attitude that you are right and nobody can make you think otherwise, you're the dick, not them.
Yeah. I mean, I had a guy drop out when I was doing my undergrad. He dropped out in the second year.
I was going to ask you to bring this up.
Yeah. His scores weren't as good as he thought they should have been. And eventually he argued that he was just so good that the tutor was jealous of him and was worried that he was going to take his job, and that's why he was being marked down, so he was quitting and moving to another university where he'd be more appreciated.
That's so weird. I have the opposite answers. I don't have the best grade I could have. I have a good average, but I don't have the best average. But I understand it as being fine, because I know that sometimes I'm not wrong, but because the way I express myself is creative or unusual, I'm not a textbook answer. So I know if a PA at a teacher assistant correct me, he might not agree that it's acceptable, even if you understand it is. So sometimes my grades are lower than it should be, but I'm not wrong. I know I wasn't wrong. Everyone knows I'm not wrong, but I'm not meeting expectation, as someone would say.
You're not hitting the
That's
academic
fine.
qualifications for getting that grade. Yeah.
I think if you are in philosophy or literature, that's another good example of that. You should accept that being good doesn't mean having good grade per se. There is a correlation, but it's not all that there is.
It's not. Yeah, that's it.
Like I'm sure you will. Like you say that I'm better than you sometimes, but I think you say that because I sound confident, right? Not because I'm necessarily better than you.
No, it's like with anything else. You know more in certain areas than I do. And there's probably other stuff that I've learned.
I forgot to ask you, what was your specific field exactly?
I did a more general kind of master's where we dived into a whole bunch of stuff like Foucault, Rousseau, nature and aesthetics, all those kind of things. And then my dissertation was actually in virtue ethics.
Interesting.
So yeah, it's just different teaching methods. So you might have learned more in some areas than I have.
Yeah, because as I told you before, I think my university very much value diversity in philosophy. So we are taught about pretty much every different school we can be taught about.
Yeah, that's kind of what we did, but also focused in some obscure areas, and it also kind of got us on the ground running to what some of the bigger questions are currently going on in philosophy, like philosophy of mind and questions in aesthetics and stuff like that. Yeah.
I'm not much of a philosophy of the mind guy. I think it's a bit boring for me, but I understand it's important. I even took a class called philosophy of the mind, actually. It wasn't the most fun, but it was very much important work, and I recognize it.
It was my weakest area, hence why I've got a ton of books up there so that I could actually get my grade up enough to not screw up my average. Yeah,
I understand that perfectly. Right now, I have a class like on empiricism. Actually, that's why I have such fresh memories of you.
Yeah. And Hume is good. Like he's who you want to read if you want to read about empiricism.
Also, Thomas Reid is pretty good, actually, because Thomas Reid defends the common sense. He defends the common people, which is not very common in philosophy when you think about it. And that's why he's interesting.
The discussion between him and Hume on testimony is a really interesting one, and it kind of expands your view on how you actually look at testimony.
Yeah. I think that discussion about empiricism are pretty much very modern right now because it's so relevant to science that it just doesn't fade off. It's still relevant.
It's relevant, yeah, and it's always expanding. You know what I mean? They're always grinding the details down more and more and more.
I actually have to do a dissertation on some topic relating to that right now, and I still haven't found a topic. Yeah, there's so much I could cover.
That's it. That's the hard part about writing like a dissertation or a thesis is that you have all this information that you need to cut down into like 30,000 words. But there's so much in the field that you've got to describe. That's why one of my tutors said, focus on a 12-word question. If you can ask your question in 12 words.
I add 6 words because French is more lengthy.
Okay, yeah. If you can get it into that, you can actually focus on the question that little bit more and find the information that's relevant.
Yeah, but my point was, even if you didn't study philosophy, Joe, I don't think you need to be taught philosophy to learn philosophy. Like a lot of my classroom, I will be honest, a lot of classes, I don't even show up. I'm serious. Like some of my class, I don't even show up and I still get like an A. So it's not true that it's always the case that you need a teacher. And I know it sounds weird coming from someone that wants to be a philosophy teacher, but yeah, if you're good, if you have the good attitude and the good work ethics, you can learn a lot by yourself.
Yeah, no, I agree.
It's kind of dispositional.
Yeah.
I just don't think I've got the time or the ability at the moment to have a good ethic on it.
But you have the right mindset, and that's more than most people.
I mean, thank you. I'll take the compliment. I won't say no.
That's what me and Kevin are here for. To fill you in on information.
You are as a comic relief.
and tech support.
Hey, that's stealing my job, the comic relief.
So I'm gonna try and work backwards through the chat. If you've got any more questions coming in, like let me know, guys. I'm just gonna try and get to some of these messages.
Write them now, because we don't want to comment on your discussions without all the context, you know.
So Srida said, someone said to me yesterday that atheism is a belief like not playing tennis is a sport. Oh, yeah. So
what?
Yeah. So that one is the same thing like the coin collector.
Is a belief like off is a TV channel.
Yeah.
Kimo says bald is a hair color.
Yeah, that's one.
Off is a TV channel.
Yeah, they're all the common ones that you hear, and you're just like, I understand why people come up with this thing. It's because of their aversion to what they think of as religious language, and they don't want to. They even if they do accept it true that gods do not exist or something like that, they won't say they believe gods don't exist. And no, I don't have beliefs, and
even though we all have beliefs.
Exactly, I know, but
even having knowledge means you have beliefs, because knowledge is
a subset of
belief.
yeah. So these are common bad atheist tropes that come up. I understand why they come about, and from a certain perspective, I get that they do make sense, especially if you do have a very narrow yet broad understanding of what atheism is. Okay, yeah, I sort of understand the entailment of what you're saying.
You just gave me an idea for a very fun thing for you to do, and I think you'd like that. Have you seen those atheist videos where we review arguments against for God, and they say that's the best one, that's the worst one, and their opinion? I hate those videos. I hate them because they always overrate they always overrate good arguments. Like they tend to think that Pascal wager is a bad argument, which isn't true. It's actually a pretty good argument. But
it's because they don't actually understand it.
Yes, that's why. So I think doing the same thing, but from a correct perspective, might be actually interesting, because they always evaluate those arguments without understanding them. Like, a lot of people think the ontological argument is terrible. No, it's pretty good actually if you understand it correctly. It's not perfect, no argument is, but it's a valid and decent argument. The argument that most atheists agree is the best is the cosmological argument. But actually, I think it's one of the worst arguments. If you ask me,
which cosmological argument?
The cosmological argument that, like,
the
one that is about probability, right? The one about, like, statistically it's unlikely that life is purely random and stuff like that.
All right, yeah.
I think it's how it goes usually. The problem with it is, to me, that's the worst argument. That's not a very good argument. And actually, if you understand it correctly, that's like a weaker version of Pascal wager, actually. So if you like the cosmological argument, but you think Pascal's wager is terrible, then you don't understand Pascal wager, because it's the same type of argument, but actually Pascal wager is better. I'm sorry, that's just how it is.
That's fair. We actually, one of the two of the questions I'll actually put up from our 10 questions for atheists that we got responses back. One of them was, what's the most convincing argument or other evidence against God or religion? And then we actually asked atheists, what are the most convincing or interesting arguments for God's existence? So these are actually the ones that make them think the most. And they were very, very different from the ones that you'd expect to come up. Actually, it showed that the people who had responded definitely thought about these questions a lot more. And yeah, I mean, if you've got the chance, check those out. You might like them a bit more than some of these other videos, because they're definitely people who have looked into them. And there was a new one in there, actually. The moral economy, which I'd not heard of before. And I'm not even going to go into it now because we could be chatting about that all night. And yeah, it's coming up for 11:30, so I'm waiting for any last questions coming through, and if not, we are going to sign off shortly.
Someone says, would you be okay with atheism as a religion? Like, insert the same analogy. It wasn't directed at us, but we could answer it.
So that one, I think that's often where they come up with atheism is a religion like bald is a hair color. That's generally how that one comes up with, but it does sometimes refer to belief as well. One last point on the belief thing. Even if you're saying you don't believe, well, technically you believe that you don't believe, so it's a second order belief anyway. But that's neither here nor there. Atheism is a religion like insert the same analogy. Yeah, I mean, atheism isn't a religion, but I will say some atheists do act like they're religious. They are ideological, they are dogmatic, and so on and so forth. I suppose... I don't know. I don't know if the analogy would actually work that way. Let's just say if we use how we prefer to use atheism as, the proposition gods don't exist. And atheists are people that believe gods don't exist. Then would that work as, atheism as a religion like believing the TV is switched off is TV channel? Is that how it would work? I don't know. I'm trying to think of how that analogy
I think there's a reason why usually we associate religious beliefs with belief in some form of divinity. Because if you don't, there's some problem with it. Like, the reason we say that the Church of Scientology is still a religion is because, yeah, you do all scientifically team believe, but ultimately to believe in a form of divine. Like, it's a very weird form of divine, but you do believe in one. So if you have a scientifically based belief of the divine, I will call that a religion, yes. But if you don't hold belief about the divine at all, like if you are a non-theist, then no, I don't think atheism in itself can be called a religion, because it's like you could call it a religion, I guess, because you all to believe that the divine doesn't exist. But that's like saying that you can be a political ideology if you believe a political ideology don't exist. I don't know. I'm not sure. I don't disagree with it on a conceptual level. I think it makes sense to say that atheism could be a religion, but I think on a day-to-day usage, it doesn't seem to work, rhetorically speaking.
No, definitely not. I mean, there are atheistic religions. There are a couple of atheistic religions, right? And they're regarded as religions because of the doctrine and the practices and all of that. But atheism is not a religion. That's not what we're really getting at here with this question, though. It's asking, so... for example, the original one was atheism is a belief like not collecting coins is a hobby. So, like that's the sort of thing, right? So obviously not collecting coins isn't a hobby. But atheism is a belief, it's...
not collecting STDs can be quite the hobby if you're good at it.
Yeah. But so in this thing, atheism is a religion. Okay, it clearly isn't a religion, right? There are atheistic religions. If you're Aaron Ra, I mean, religion itself is atheistic because it doesn't hold beliefs itself. It's only people that can. So
yeah, it leads to a contradiction that is very funny.
Yeah, of course it is. But in this sense, right, atheism is not a religion like insert, not collecting coins is a hobby, or not collecting stamps is a hobby. I mean, I suppose it kind of works because atheism is not a religion, and
that's
not
the
collecting...
thing I don't understand, because like when we talk about rock theism, the way Aaron Ra understands it is that a non-theist is just everything that isn't theist. But if I say a non-theist, it doesn't go back to theism.
Why wouldn't it? Why would a non-theist not go back to theism?
Well,
isn't that a double negative?
Yes, but my point is, if a non-theist is everything that isn't a theist,
Yeah.
then a non-theist is everything that isn't a theist, which can include a cat. We're back to square one.
But yeah. So and Srita says, I don't know why anyone would say something that stupid. Is talking, there was another message further up about atheism being a religion. The reason people will say atheism is a religion is because of how many atheists behave online and how they group together, how they meme bomb, how they all have the same tactics, how they seem to act like fundamentalists.
Well, many of them are ex-fundamentalists.
Exactly. So they've still got those behaviors in there. And so therefore they see atheism as a religion. And then it builds this thing. And then they start talking to these atheists and they all behave in the same way. And it's like, oh, you've clearly got a doctrine. And then you've got those who are also scientistic, as in they adhere to scientism, whether they admit it or not.
To replicate the culture of a dogmatic religion, but with atheistic beliefs.
Exactly. There's no God, but they might deify science. So science becomes their God.
It's non-scientistic.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that is why someone will think that about some atheists. I can understand it. I can see atheists behaving as if they're in a religion, and you see it online all the time, and they've all got the common beef. And what happens when you say, well, I think this particular atheist meme is bad, or I think you might misunderstand this theistic argument, you get othered, right? You get treated like you're not part of our church and get kicked out of the group. You don't like the certain atheist post and you like a theist post. Oh, clearly you're a theist. There's so many things like that. So yeah, that is why people will say something like that, because from the inferences that they get from those people's behaviors, it's not actually that stupid, even though we can see as outside observers that it kind of is. there you go. Hopefully that's answered your question. I'm just trying to... So John mentions any set of ideas can cause somebody to be religious. It doesn't necessarily require a supernatural belief. You're right. Usually it does. But there is the Satanic Church and the Satanic Temple. They're both atheistic religions that are more of an up yours to Christianity, but they don't actually believe in Satan. Although the Satanic Church does believe in magic, I believe, although Satanic Temple doesn't. There's also original Buddhism, and most forms of Buddhism do not have gods or anything like that, but they might have some spiritual stuff, and there are some forms that do have more godly stuff. It can be a bit wishy-washy, and there's a couple of other atheistic religions that I can't remember off the top of my head. I think you
could consider a lot of the ancient schools of philosophy as forms of religion. Like, if you ever heard about Epicureanism, it's kind of like a religion in a way. Stoicism was also practiced a bit like a religion when you think about it.
Pythagoras sort of had a religion built up around him.
Yeah, but they thought he was a god. So that's kind of a weird one. I mean, there wasn't a god, but they thought there was a god. So it's still it's sort of a theistic religion there, isn't it? And now all we've got left of him is his triangles.
I mean, me and Dave are probably more familiar with post-sophist era philosophers, because pre that there are not that many. So
the pre-Socratic, there isn't a lot of information about them. Yeah,
we don't know many of them, so only a few.
Yeah, what's left is basically either scraps or what people quoted from post-Socratic area and Socratic area.
And since most Western philosophy followed the post-Socratic era, we tend to be biased toward it too.
Yeah.
It's a good point from Honestly Atheist, actually. Something that I know many other atheists do miss, right? Atheism isn't a religion like theism isn't a religion, right? That's a really good way to put it, because many atheists conflate theism and religion.
You don't have to be religious to be a theist. Yeah.
And you don't have to be a theist to be religious either. You know, they're not the same thing. Yes, there generally is a connection. There generally is.
It's like when you say an Amerindian is an autochthone, but an autochthone is not an Amerindian. Like an Amerindian is a native, but a native is not an Amerindian. Yeah.
So you do have some theists who are completely secular and non-religious, not just politically secular, but like completely removed from any form of religion. And as we mentioned, there are atheistic religions, but that doesn't make atheism itself. Atheism is a position on a topic, just like theism is a position on a topic. In the way that we use it, and the propositional sense, they're basically ontological positions. But even if you use it in the more broad sense, which is theism and non-theism, still neither of them become a religion. They are still positions on a topic.
Yeah,
they're
and
just not quite so mirrored.
I think my point earlier about theism implying a relationship to the divine is also relevant, because a lot of atheists, for some reason, think that deism is theism, but it isn't.
Yeah,
I think Spinoza is theism, but most people agree that when you read Spinoza, it's more like it's deism. It's not really theism. I don't know why there's such a conflation, because it's pretty clear for me that there's a difference. Well, I don't think, if I think that God is the universe, that doesn't mean that I believe I have a personal relationship with the universe.
So would you? So when you're saying theism, there, are you speaking more of classical theism? Because could you refer to theism as the broad brush of theism, any sort of God belief?
I don't think so, because when you look at other religions that are theistic, Hinduism, Buddhism,
they're polytheistic, yeah.
Even if you are polytheistic, you still believe in some form of relationship to the divine. Think about Altos religion with reincarnation. That's a relationship to the divine. You have a relationship to the divine, which in this case is the cycle of reincarnation. So it is true. You have a relationship with the divine. But if you're a deist, you don't believe you have a relationship with the divine. You believe the divine is nature. That's different.
Yeah, I mean, I have heard a couple of different takes on deism from deists themselves, but generally when they do believe in a more personal approach, it's because their deistic beliefs have been influenced by Christianity. So it's sort of a blend of Christianity and deism. And
I think we could call that weak theism, if we wanted to be technical. Because you have a weak relationship to the divine that is influenced by deism, which is what technically Spinoza had, because Spinoza still was a theist technically, but he was a weak theist. He didn't believe in a strong relationship to the divine, because he believed everything was God. He believed you and I are God. The chair, the table, everything, we're just like facets of divinity, which is a weak relationship to the divine, because you don't separate it enough to have a relationship, right? It's like saying I have a relationship
unless you have multiple
arm.
Personalities, then you could.
I guess so.
At least ones that can communicate with each other.
Spinoza is a good example of all the rich tradition and theology that there is in philosophy. Like, if you want to read weird stuff about God, there's a lot. Like, have you ever heard of Malebranche? It's a French philosophers that preceded, that was about the same time as Spinoza. And a lot of people confuse them, but Spinoza is different. Like, Malebranche believed that we are individuals, unlike Spinoza. Spinoza believed everything is God. That's not the case of Malebranche. Malebranche believed that, contrary to him, he believed that the only active principle in the world is God. So he believed that the law of physics worked because God do it. He believed that everything that happened is because God is okay with it. As you know, that the saying, nothing can go against God's will, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, Malebranche takes this literally. He thinks everything happened only because God wills it. So when you move your arm, even your own arm, it's not you that is moving your arm. It's God allowing you to move your arm. Basically. God is letting you do it. He's doing it for you. Like, it's God complying to your desire, basically. Yeah, that's weird. That's
actually,
weird, but it is what really.
I don't really watch it, but there was actually an AXP where a caller came in, and they believe that everything went, according to God's will.
That's called. Sorry, there's a name for that. not interventionism, occasionalism, yeah. Because you believe that everything that is caused by the universe, everything that has a cause, the cause is God.
Yeah, that's
everything. That's why it's weird, because the only thing that isn't caused by God and this mindset is your own thinking. Your own mind is not under control of God, but everything else is, and that's very funny to me.
Yeah. Icarus has just thrown me off, though.
Yeah. A lot of people didn't like that at the time, and he accused Malebranche of heresy because he said, "Aren't we just puppets of God and your worldview?" And yeah, it does seem like it, doesn't it? We're just puppets. Let us do stuff because he's okay with it, but actually we don't have any power, according to Malebranche. Funny, right?
Good point about being a religion. The Satanic Temple has enjoyed tax-exempt non-profit status for a few years now. So, how do we form a religion?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
How do we? It wasn't a question. He said the Satanic Temple has enjoyed tax-exempt non-profit status for a few years now, and I just said, well, how do we form a religion? Because I could do with some of that.
Someone is asking me a question specifically for me. Actually, you want me to answer it?
Yeah, whereabouts is it? For Kevin, there it is. There you go. So he says, since Quebec adopted Secularism Act in 2019 and the expected challenges thereto, is opposition still percolating or boiling over?
Yeah, I might need to provide some context there, right? So there was in 2019 a very controversial law that was passed. It's called Bill 21. What this does, technically speaking, is prohibit the exhibition and display of ostentatious religious symbols and political symbols, not just religious, in context of authority. So if you are a doctor, if you are a teacher, if you're a police officer, or a politician, that technically counts, you're not allowed to show display of strong religious or political belief in public and the context of your work. So the misinterpretation of this law was that if you are like a Muslim woman that want to take the bus, you have to take out your veil. That's not true. That's what a misunderstanding that a lot of people thought was the truth, but it wasn't. And that's still part of the problem with it. A lot of people don't understand the law. A lot of people think that's the case when it's not. But even if you understand it and you're still against it, a lot of people think it's hypocritical for a liberal society to say that a teacher should not exhibit symbols of religion if they are still allowed to talk about it anyway, right? And yeah, I agree it's a complicated topic, and I'm a bit uncomfortable thinking about it because Quebec has a long, complicated history with religion. We both respect and hate it because the church defended us against the British invaders, defended us against assimilation, but he also played both sides. He also betrayed us too. So historically speaking, Quebecers don't have a good track record with religion. They are both against and for us. They are scheming individuals. Like, we don't have the best view of it all the time. It's a mixed bag. So when people think about religion in Quebec, they think a lot about the negatives of it, about the dangers of it. I think most Quebecers will agree that it's true that when you think about it, it's not because your doctor wear a hijab that you're going to be threatened. But also other people like me can bring out the fact that, well, I'm gay, and if my doctor is a Muslim and very proud Muslim, I might be uncomfortable with talking about my own sexual health, for example. So there is this conflict where people fear the intolerance of religious belief, so they become but also we call it intolerant to fear that about the religious people. And I don't have an answer really, because it's true that in a way we are being intolerant. I have to agree, because we are presuming that being religious makes you intolerant. But also they are intolerant religious people. So I don't know how to fix that. And I think that there was already a lot of laws that could have been tweaked to make it, to do what we wanted to do in the end. Prevent people in position of power from using their power unfairly, because technically it's already illegal to do propaganda and stuff like that. It was already legal. Just this time it was targeting specifically symbols. And people didn't like that because it said most Christians are already very subtle. Most Christians don't wear the cross. They don't wear ostentatious symbols. So it doesn't affect them. And the people most likely to be affected are Hindus, Sikhs, the Sikh religion, and Muslims. So that's why people said it was racially insensitive too, because those are the people that nowadays show the most religious symbols.
Yeah.
So people said it's a bit hypocritical because Christians won't be affected until, even if they are targeted too, technically. But like, how many people wear nuns hats and stuff like that? Nobody does.
Mm.
But a lot of people wear the religious veils and the little bindi and stuff like that. Yeah. He did make an exception for religious tattoos because those are on your skin. Also hairstyles, beards, stuff like that. That's not included.
What about, the Sikhs, I can't remember what it's called, but the wrap for their hair.
Yeah, turban.
But, surely they can't ban them from wearing that. That's a very important part of their...
I think there was a compromise made because even though it is technically part of the religion, the reason to wear the turban is because of their hair.
Yeah.
And since it's their hair that is the religious symbol, that's fine because it's part of your body, so it's allowed.
Right,
and because the turban is there to keep your
cover
hair,
it up.
It's allowed. Yeah. And even the veil is technically allowed. What is not allowed is like a full face covering veil because that goes like in other laws about not hiding your face and when you are a public worker. Like as a teacher, you cannot teach without us seeing your face. That's just not okay. Same with your doctor or a police officer.
Yeah, I sort of understand that.
Yeah, I understand there's a lot of gray area. That's why the law is so disliked, because it's easy to misinterpret it in the worst way possible. But it's also gray enough that you can do what I just did. That is to interpret it the most charitable way. Do I think it was necessary right now? I don't think so. But I don't think it will be as harmful as the opponent of the law believe it is. Actually, there was a study done after the law was passed to see how many people currently will be affected. It was like less than 100 people will be directly affected right now.
Right.
Less than 100 people right now in position of power will be affected. So either that means there's little to no religious people in position of power, which is surprising, I guess, or just so that they already complied with it before it. Like they already didn't want to show too much of their religion, which is fine too, I guess.
Fair. I had no clue any of that was going on, so there you go.
Think about the laws in France. You probably are more familiar with France because it's closer.
No.
But it's like a less drastic version of French laws on secularism. France is much worse than Quebec on that. They are very strict and irrational to a bit. Like, I think they banned like burkinis, they call it, like basically when a woman was covered on the beach, which everyone thought was a weird ban. Yeah. Kimo says there was a big row years ago concerning the RCMP, which is like the Montreal Police, not Montreal Police, the Royal Mounted Police, not allowing Sikhs to wear their turbans. I guess folk thought it would interfere with the Tesson at or motorcycle helmets. Yeah, like I said, there is obviously like practical concerns about some religious symbols, and if you have long hair, it can actually be a detriment to some jobs. So
yeah. Well, yeah. I mean,
it's why the army doesn't let you grow your hair or beard, right?
Yeah.
Because in a close combat situation, it can be a detriment.
Yeah, definitely. There's also the point of conformity as well, though. There.
Also.
Yeah. But yeah. It's the same thing like when you're a chef, they don't like you to have a beard or long hair, and if you do it, you're supposed to wear like a beard net and have you always wear a hat to keep it, just to try and minimize, because hair just falls out. It just does. Whatever age you are, it's always bits that fall out. So yeah. Apparently, in the UK, Sikhs are exempt from wearing cycle helmets if they wear a turban. But I didn't know that either.
Isn't a turban not a good way to protect your head, though? Like, the helmet is supposed to protect you in case of a crash.
Yeah.
But I don't think you have enough air on your head with your turban on to protect you.
No, I know. So they may be exempt, but they're obviously putting themselves in danger. I guess that's just it, though. Is it only themselves that they're putting in danger there?
Probably mostly themselves, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if they're going to crash into someone, the damage wouldn't change too much whether they had a helmet on or not.
I guess it's a choice the hour to make, because I guess if you have so much air in your head that you need a turbine, wearing a helmet might be difficult, I guess.
I definitely think it would be difficult, yeah. Unless you ended up getting one custom made that ended up being...
says a heavy beard can present difficulties when it comes to gas masks. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah,
like,
that's a good point.
I'm sure you guys understand that masking during the pandemic with a beard is
so
very
itchy.
annoying.
So itchy. Yeah. I can understand why so many surgeons are cleanly shaven, because they have to be in a mask all day, every day.
Also, how embarrassing would it be if one of your beard fell into someone you're operating? Can you imagine that?
Yeah. You hear all these stories like, oh my God, I've left the scalpel in there. Yeah, I've just left half my beard in there.
I forgot my glasses in them.
Awesome. Right, it's coming up to midnight, so I am going to...
Yeah, for you, I forgot about that.
Yeah, no, it's cool. I mean, I'm just desperate for a wee, really. That's the real reason I'm ending. So, Kevin, thank you so much for joining us again. It's always a pleasure to have you here.
Yeah, nice one, Kevin. It was a really good discussion. Thank you.
Yeah.
Let us know if you've got any free time coming up, and we're happy to do anything. If you've got any ideas of anything you actually want to come on and discuss with us, that'd be awesome too.
Well, there was the idea I said earlier about maybe watching a few of those videos about ranking arguments that atheists like to make, and making ourselves a comment about that, about why we agree or disagree with their takes.
Yeah, I'm up for doing something like that at some point.
Watch 2 or 3 videos like that, because there's a lot of those. We may watch the most popular one, like the 3 most popular ones, and then
I know genetically modified skeptic.
Yeah, that's the one that genetically modified skeptic is what I was thinking about, because I so much disagree with his take.
Well, I suppose the thing is, what you could actually do there as well is actually explain the bits of the argument.
Because I know those arguments very well, actually.
So you can explain it.
I read them into original
and I'll do my
context.
best to dumb it down to a level I can understand.
like Dave said, you can just read them yourselves.
Yeah.
You can read the original argument, but I think the problem with people like genetically modified skeptic and stuff like that is they don't have the academic education and philosophy like we do to understand those arguments. So they just sound weird to them, and I understand that. Like when I started in philosophy, a lot of it sounded obscure, esoteric, or like a religious apologia too. And while it's true that most deist philosophers are apologists, they're not bad at it, actually. They're pretty good. But because apologist may be an insult by atheists, but that you can be an apologist for anything, really.
Yeah, that's
you can have an atheism apologist.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or you can have us, who are apparently, crypto-theist apologist cult leaders.
I mean, some people call me a philosophy apologist because I defend philosophers.
Yeah.
Like I could be called a John Stuart Mill apologist because I argue that John Stuart Mill wasn't racist when someone says he is. You can't be an apologist for anyone.
John says, actually, he did a debate/conversation with Matt Dillahunty. I think it'd be really interesting for us to review too. I'll give that a go. Send it over. We can do that at some point in the future.
The argument backfiring that I send you to. That could be interesting.
Yeah. There we go. We got lots of content. All I need to do now is be reminded about it about 6 or 7 times, and I'll put it in the diary.
You could just ask right now, what do you guys in chat think is the most interesting of those topics?
All of them. I think all of them would be interesting to do at different points. So John, you send me that video over. I like doing the video review stuff. I like having a balanced stuff, and I think I do like the idea of dissecting some of these arguments that you mentioned, because you're right, people do get them wrong. I mean, I've had bad understandings of a lot of these arguments before, and it's not till we started looking into them in a bit more detail, that it was like, oh, so that's what that was supposed to be about. Yeah, everybody really does have this one wrong.
A lot of people don't know about some arguments too. Like Dave, I'm sure you know about it. Anselm's proslogion, the answer to the program of evil. Do you remember that? No?
Sorry, I was stepping away. Sorry, what was that?
Do you know about Anselm's proslogion?
No, sorry.
His answer to the problem of evil. He's like a medieval philosopher. It's not very known, but it's actually one of the better answers to the problem of evil that exist. Where basically, if I summarize, he says that evil is not, God doesn't let evil exist, actually. God let imperfect things exist, and we perceive imperfection as evil.
Interesting. It's one way to take it.
That's a very, very summarized version. It's more elaborate than that, obviously.
Yeah. Sounds like an excuse to me.
I think I've got the argument in one of the compendiums.
But my point is, a lot of atheists don't know the most interesting arguments that could be studied about that.
Yeah, I think you're right.
I also know a lot of atheist arguments that atheists don't know. Like, if you read some atheists, some recent atheists, you can find very interesting arguments against God that are novel and that people don't know about.
Yeah. I think that's it, though. I think a lot of atheists don't actually know much of the atheistic side of philosophy of religion either. And I think that's why they get so easily pulled in sometimes when they meet a theist that does have the good philosophical arguments for an existence of God. And then all of a sudden they're blown away and they're like, oh my God. And they start believing in a particular God or that person's particular God because they haven't got a good counter and they can't find a good counter. And they're just like, shit, you must be right. And at least they're consistent. The evidence does change their mind. Quite often people say that and it doesn't. But they're at least consistent in that part. But the problem is they haven't done enough investigation and self-learning to be able to realize that actually these arguments that they've been presented aren't necessarily as good, or there is a good counter to it. So yeah, I forgot what I was going to say. It doesn't matter.
You look it
up. But yes, thank you everybody who's joined in, and again, thank you, Kevin and Dave. Just before we go, if there was one video that we've released recently that you would suggest to someone else to check out, which one would it be?
I know this will be kind of off the topic, but the one on my channel that I released, the Atheist Shoutouts.
If anyone is unaware, Dave has recently done an atheist shout-out video on his channel, and it's talking about the best atheist content creators, and it's definitely worth checking out.
That's just it. It's a good way to expand what you're looking at and what you're taking in and the different arguments and different ideas.